Power Play Penalties, a hockey romance where faking it gets way too real and way too close. By Riley Fox. Copyright 2025 Riley Fox. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without written permission from the author, except for the use of brief quotations in a book review.
Chapter 1. The hit heard round the fridge. The nutrition wing of the den looked like a tornado had swept through a supplement store. Owen Lane stood in the doorway, clipboard clutched against his chest, reading glasses sliding down his nose as he surveyed the disaster zone that was apparently his new domain. Protein bar wrappers littered every surface like confetti from the world's least fun party. Ancient bottles of creatine sat in corners, their labels so faded they might as well have been archaeological artifacts. He pushed his glasses back up and stepped carefully around a puddle of what he desperately hoped was spilled Gatorade. The contract had mentioned the team needed nutritional guidance, but nobody had warned him he'd be conducting an intervention. Okay, he muttered, pulling a pen from his cardigan pocket. Assessment first. Panic later. The clipboard felt reassuring in his hands as he started documenting the chaos. Empty energy drink cans balanced precariously on shelves next to supplements that expired when flip phones were still relevant. A lone banana sat browning on the counter, looking as lost and overwhelmed as Owen felt. Minutes later, he'd filled 2 pages with violations that would make a health inspector weep. But at least he had a plan now. Organization was his superpower, and this place needed a hero. The locker room fridge made him question his life choices. Owen stood before the ancient appliance, one hand covering his nose, the other gripping his clipboard like a shield against the horrors within. The smell hit him first, a combination of sour milk, rotting vegetables, and something that might once have been meat. He'd opened Pandora's box. If Pandora had been really into expired dairy products. Sweet merciful! He cut himself off, remembering he was technically at work. Professional composure, Lane, even in the face of biological warfare. A takeout container in the back corner had developed what appeared to be its own ecosystem. Green fuzz covered something that might have been Chinese food, possibly from the Paleolithic era. An energy drink had leaked sticky orange residue across the bottom shelf, cementing several protein bars to the surface like some kind of nightmare mosaic. And was that, yes, that was definitely a sandwich from last season, judging by the date, scribbled on the wrapper in faded Sharpie. Owen wondered briefly if it qualified as a historical artifact at this point. He pulled on disposable gloves and got to work. 20 minutes of systematic purging later, he'd filled 2 garbage bags with biological hazards and reclaimed the fridge as a functioning appliance. The satisfaction was immediate and profound. Color-coded labels emerged from his supply box like magic. Red for expiration dates, green for approval stamps, blue for special dietary notes. Each shelf got wiped down, organized by food group, and labeled with his neat handwriting. And stepped back, adjusting his reading glasses to admire his handiwork. The fridge gleamed like something from a health food commercial. Every item had been checked, sorted, and given his stamp of approval. His stomach unclenched for the first time since walking into the den. Maybe this job wouldn't be so bad after all. The sound of angry footsteps shattered his moment of peace. Jack Carter burst through the nutrition area doors like a hurricane with anger management issues. Sweat plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and his practice jersey clung to his broad shoulders. Everything about him radiated barely contained fury, from his clenched fists to the muscle jumping in his jaw. Where the hell is my protein shake? The words cut through the ambient noise of the den. Distant skate blades on ice, the hum of machinery, someone's music bleeding through headphones with surgical precision. Owen's clipboard trembled slightly in his hands as Jack's scowl landed on him like a physical weight. Sorry, what? Owen blinked, glasses lighting down again. He pushed them up, buying himself a second to process the 6-foot-whatever wall of irritated hockey player before him. My shake, the one that was in the fridge. Jack's voice carried that particular brand of exhausted aggression that came from too much adrenaline and not enough patience. Dark blue bottle. Had my name on it. Owen's stomach dropped. He glanced toward his neatly organized fridge, then back at Jack's increasingly thunderous expression. The expired one? Expired? Jack's eyebrows shot up. It wasn't expired. It was of last year. Of last year. Owen held up his clipboard like a peace offering, flipping to the page where he documented his purge. I have a complete list of everything I disposed of, organized by expiration date and potential health risk. That shake was, well, it was definitely in the red category. Jack stared at him for a long moment, something dangerous flickering behind his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. You threw away my stuff. Without asking. Yes, I can make you a fresh one right now. I have a complete protein powder selection organized by dietary needs and flavor profiles. Owen gestured toward his carefully arranged supplements, each one bearing a fresh green approval sticker. Based on your training schedule and body weight, I'd recommend. I don't give a damn about your recommendations. The explosion was sudden and spectacular. Jack's voice ricocheted off the walls, loud enough to make Owen flinch and probably rattle windows 3 floors up. His face flushed dark with anger and exhaustion, every line of his body radiating frustration. You've been here for, 5 minutes? And you think you can just waltz in and throw away my stuff? Who the hell hired some clipboard-carrying control freak to mess with our routines anyway? Owen felt his own composure starting to crack. His fingers tightened around his clipboard as heat rose in his chest. Professional, stay professional. Even when dealing with overgrown children who apparently couldn't read expiration dates. I'm trying to prevent food poisoning, he said, voice rising despite his best efforts to remain calm. Maybe you should try reading labels before consuming biological weapons. Biological weapons? Jack stepped closer, all intimidating height and righteous indignation. It was a protein shake, not anthrax. It was a science experiment, Owen shot back, his sunshine demeanor finally hitting its limit. That thing was older than some of your teammates. I'm surprised it hadn't achieved sentience and started demanding its own locker. Look, pencil pusher? Cancel pusher? Owen's voice cracked with disbelief. I have a master's degree in sports nutrition from one of the best programs in the country. I've worked with Olympic athletes and Division I teams. I'm not some intern with a clipboard, though apparently I'm the only one here who can read a calendar. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Fancy Degree, Jack snarled, stepping even closer. Owen caught the scent of sweat and something distinctly masculine that short-circuited his brain for half a second. Did they teach you how to ask permission before touching other people's property, or was that class optional? Did they teach you basic food safety in whatever correspondence course you got your attitude from? Owen fired back, because last I checked, consuming expired dairy products wasn't considered a performance enhancement. Jack's face went an alarming shade of red. Uptight pencil-pushing control freak? You're right, meathead. This is so cinematic. Both men froze mid-argument at the cheerful interruption. Owen's head whipped toward the doorway where Luca Pena stood, phone held high, a delighted grin spreading across his face as he continued recording. Oh, don't stop on my account, Luca said, adjusting his angle for better lighting. This is pure gold. The passion, the tension. You two have serious chemistry. Owen felt the blood drain from his face as the reality of the situation hit him like a freight train. They'd been yelling at each other. Really yelling. And Luca had caught every word on camera. His carefully planned professional debut had just imploded in spectacular fashion. Chemistry? Jack's voice came out strangled. We were arguing about expired protein shakes. Sure you were, Luca winked, still filming. The way you two were going at it? Classic enemies to lovers setup. Someone definitely needs to make a gif of that moment when you step closer, Carter. Very intense. Owen watched in growing horror as Luca's thumbs started flying across his phone screen with the enthusiasm of someone who just discovered fire. The rookie goalie was muttering under his breath about hashtags and social media engagement, his eyes bright with mischievous glee. Aki drama, Kodiak's contra, no wait, team tension, ooh, protein shake gate. Pena, Jack's voice carried a warning note, put the phone down. Are you kidding? This is going straight to the group chat. Then TikTok, maybe Instagram stories too. The fans are going to eat this up. Luca's grin widened as he kept typing. I can already see the fan theories brewing. Jack cursed under his breath, something creative involving Luca's phone and anatomically impossible suggestions for where he could put it before storming out of the nutrition area. As Jack's footsteps echoed down the hallway, Owen heard his phone buzz with what sounded like an urgent call. Even through the concrete walls, Jack's voice carried back sharp, defensive words about media perception and final warnings that made Owen's stomach clench with unexpected guilt. Whatever damage their argument had caused, it was clearly bigger than expired protein shakes. His heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by the distant sound of a locker slamming hard enough to rattle the walls. Owen stood alone with Luca, who was still happily documenting the aftermath on his phone. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft tapping of thumbs on screen and Owen's increasingly labored breathing as panic set in. "You know," Luca said conversationally, finally lowering his phone, "for what it's worth, I think you won that round. The biological weapons line was chef's kiss." Owen just stared at him, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. An hour later, Owen was beginning to understand what actual hell looked like. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, sharp red lipstick, and an expression that revealed absolutely nothing about what was happening behind those calculating eyes. Dana Kim stood in the nutrition area like an avenging angel of public relations, her laptop open on the counter, her attention focused on the screen with laser intensity. Owen perched on a stool nearby, his clipboard forgotten in his lap as he watched his new career circle the drain in real time. 17,000 views and climbing, Dana announced without looking up from her laptop. Her voice carried the same tone most people use to discuss the weather, as if watching his professional reputation implode was just another Tuesday. "The engagement is actually quite impressive." "Impressive?" Owen repeated faintly. "Right. That's one way to put it." "The comments are particularly active. Listen to this one. OMG, the tension between them. Anyone else getting major enemies to lovers vibes?" 3 laughing, crying emojis, and a fire emoji. Dana's perfectly manicured fingers clicked across the keyboard. And this one, "Carter stepping closer, like that I can't even." Someone write the fanfic already. I went to put his head in his hands. His reading glasses slipped down his nose again, but he couldn't bring himself to care. This is a nightmare. "Oh, it gets better. Someone's already started a Twitter thread analyzing the sexual tension in your body language. Apparently, the way you held your clipboard was defensive but inviting." Dana finally looked up from her screen, those unreadable eyes studying Owen like he was a particularly interesting specimen. "I have to admit, the internet works fast these days. Sexual tension..." Owen's voice cracked. "We were arguing about food safety protocols." Dana clicked on something else. "Hockey forums are having a field day. There's a poll running on whether you two are already secretly dating or about to have angry bathroom sex. The bathroom sex option is winning by 63%. Owen made a sound that might have been a whimper. Can we make this stop? Issue a statement, threaten lawsuits?" "We could," Dana closed her laptop with a decisive snap. "Or we could use this." "Use this?" "Owen." Dana perched elegantly on the counter edge, her suit somehow remaining wrinkle-free despite the decidedly non-office, appropriate seating. "I've been doing crisis management for professional athletes for 8 years. I've seen sex scandals, drug allegations, Twitter meltdowns that ended careers. You know what I've never seen?" Owen shook his head mutely. 17,000 people invested in a hockey player's relationship status within an hour. And not because he's dating a celebrity or cheating on his wife, because he had a very public argument with the team nutritionist about expired dairy products. Dana's smile was sharp and calculating. "Do you understand how valuable that level of organic engagement is?" "I know." "Jack's approval ratings have been in the toilet since his last PR disaster. Difficult, uncoachable, toxic influence on team chemistry. Do you know what people are calling him now?" Owen was almost afraid to ask. "What?" "Passionate, intense, a man who knows what he wants." Dana counted off on her fingers. Someone started a hashtag, defend Jack Carter, arguing that his reaction was totally justified and you were being presumptuous. You've accidentally made him sympathetic. Owen's brain struggled to process this information. "But we were yelling at each other in public about food." "You were having what half the internet has decided to interpret as foreplay." Dana's expression remained perfectly composed, but something that might have been amusement flickered in her eyes. "Congratulations, Owen. You've created the first accidental shipping phenomenon in professional hockey." Shipping? Fans supporting a romantic relationship between two people, usually fictional characters, But Dana gestured vaguely toward Owen. Life imitates art, apparently. Owen sat in stunned silence as the full scope of the disaster crystallized around him. Somewhere out there, thousands of strangers were analyzing his body language for romantic subtext. Someone was probably writing fan fiction about him and Jack Carter at this very moment. His carefully organized, precisely planned professional debut had been transformed into some kind of accidental performance art. There's going to be an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, Dana said, sliding off the counter and smoothing down her skirt. 9 a.m. sharp. Conference room B. We need to discuss damage control options. Damage control, Owen repeated numbly. Or strategic opportunity management. Depends on how you look at it. Dana snapped her laptop closed and tucked it under her arm. Get some sleep, Owen. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. She clicked out of the nutrition area on her impossibly high heels, leaving Owen alone with his clipboard and the growing certainty that his carefully planned life had just taken a sharp left turn into complete chaos. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the Zamboni making its rounds on the ice. The sound was oddly comforting, mechanical, predictable, exactly the kind of ordered routine he'd been hoping to build here. Owen sighed and started organizing his label collection. At least some things still made sense.
Chapter 2, A Terrible Plan with Excellent Lighting. The ancient Keurig in the den's media lounge sounded like it was grinding concrete mixed with disappointment. Jack slouched deeper into one of the torture devices masquerading as chairs, wondering which sadist had designed furniture specifically to make 6'2" hockey players feel like contortionists with chronic back problems. Dana Kim sat across from him with her laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard like she was preparing to conduct surgery on his career. Her expression could have frozen the Zamboni water solid. To his left, Luca practically vibrated with excitement, and Owen clutched his clipboard against his chest like it could shield him from whatever fresh hell was about to unfold. Gentlemen, Dana's voice cut through the Keurig's death rattle. Thank you for being here. Let's dive right in, shall we? Jack grunted. It wasn't really a thank you for being here situation when attendance was mandatory and his alternative was unemployment, but whatever. Yesterday's incident has generated significant online engagement. Dana clicked something on her screen. 53,000 views and counting. The comment section is particularly illuminating. She began reading in the same tone someone might use to present quarterly earnings reports. Jack Carter is such an asshole. This guy needs anger management classes. Why is he still on the team? Jack's scowl deepened. Nothing new there. However, Dana's finger moved down the screen, these two have major sexual tension. The way Carter looks at him, though, someone needs to write fan fiction about this. I ship it. Ship what? Jack interrupted. Luca leaned forward eagerly. It means people want you to be together romantically. It's like, I know what shipping is, Jack snapped, though he honestly hadn't until approximately 30 seconds ago. I'm asking why anyone would... He gestured vaguely in Owen's direction. Owen's clipboard somehow managed to rise higher, like a shield against an incoming arrow. The public narrative has shifted, Dana continued, apparently immune to his confusion. Your previous incidents were viewed as unprofessional tantrums. This one reads as passionate, intense, a man defending his territory. My territory? The locker room, your space, Dana paused meaningfully, your nutritionist. Jack barked out a laugh that held zero humor. Have you lost your mind? Dana's expression didn't shift. Jack, let me be very clear about your current position. You've been suspended 3 times in your career for unsportsmanlike conduct. The front office is one PR disaster away from benching you without pay for the remainder of the season. The uncomfortable chair suddenly felt like it was made of concrete. Jack's stomach dropped somewhere around his skates. You're bluffing. Your agent received a formal warning yesterday. One more incident, a bad interview, an on-ice fight, a poorly timed social media post, and you're done. Dana leaned forward slightly. Not traded, Jack. Benched. Without pay, your contract allows for it. The media lounge went dead quiet except for the Keurig's mechanical wheezing. Jack stared at Dana's unreadable face and realized with crystalline clarity that she wasn't bluffing at all. The math was brutal and simple. Play along with whatever insane scheme she was cooking up or lose everything he'd spent 3 years rebuilding after his injury nearly ended his career. So, here's what I propose, Dana continued as if she hadn't just nuked his entire existence. We lean into the romantic narrative. 2 weeks of strategic public appearances, carefully managed social media engagement, couple-like behavior at team events. Couple-like behavior? Owen repeated faintly. I never signed up for this, Owen said, speaking directly for the first time since entering the room. His voice was steady, but Jack could see white knuckles where his hands gripped the clipboard. When I took this job, nobody mentioned performance art. Something hot and defensive flared in Jack's chest. At least the clipboard king gets a choice in whether his life gets turned into a circus act. Owen's head snapped toward him, eyes flashing behind his glasses. Clipboard king? You and that thing are surgically attached. What do you even write on it? Ways to make my life more complicated? Oh, safety protocols that apparently... Enough. Dan's voice cut across their building argument like a referee's whistle. This is exactly the kind of banter that's driving engagement. Users are calling it electric chemistry and unresolved tension. We simply need to recontextualize it. Jack slumped back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. Recontextualize. 2 weeks, Dana said, consulting her screen. Public appearances at 3 team events. Coordinated social media posts. I'll provide the captions. Interview talking points focused on mutual respect and shared interests. Shared interests, Jack snorted. We don't have any shared interests. You both work for the team. You both care about player health and performance. That's enough to build on. Dana's fingers clicked across her keyboard. Physical contact will be minimal and carefully orchestrated. Hand-holding for photos, sitting close during interviews, nothing that crosses professional boundaries. Jack felt trapped between the torture chair and the ceiling. His career was being held hostage by a woman in a power suit and a nutritionist who probably color-coded his grocery list. Ground rules, he said finally. The words tasted like defeat, but defeat with slightly better terms was still better than unemployment. No kissing on camera, no personal questions about our relationship. He made air quotes with enough sarcasm to power the building. And he can't reorganize anything else in my life. He pointed an accusing finger at Owen's clipboard. That stays in the nutrition office where it belongs. Owen's eyebrows shot above his glasses. I was doing my job. Your job is making smoothies and counting calories. It's not interior decorating my locker space. Food safety is part of... Gentlemen, Dana interrupted again. I'll draft a formal agreement outlining everyone's responsibilities and limitations. We'll start this weekend at the charity mixer. Luca, who'd been silent for a suspiciously long time, suddenly bounced in his seat like an overeager golden retriever. This is so cinematic. I could be your wingman. Document the love story. I have excellent camera skills, and I'm really good at reading body language, and Jack's death glare could have melted the Zamboni. Absolutely not. Owen made a strangled noise that might have been protest or despair. Luke will be helpful for organic social media content, Dana said, completely ignoring Jack's murderous expression. Teammate perspective. Authenticity. Authenticity, Jack repeated. Everything about this situation was fundamentally insane. He was going to pretend to date a man whose greatest joy seemed to be reorganizing things Jack didn't want reorganized. Also, strangers on the internet would think he was capable of human emotion. Dana closed her laptop with a decisive snap. I'll have contracts ready by end of day. First public appearance is Saturday at 6 p.m. Dress code is business casual. Owen, I'll need you comfortable with basic physical contact by then. Owen's clipboard somehow managed to rise another inch. Basic physical contact, hand-holding, arm around shoulders, sitting close enough to suggest intimacy without crossing into inappropriate workplace behavior. Dana gathered her things with the efficiency of someone who just successfully negotiated a hostage situation. Think friendly proximity, not romance novel. Jack stood up, his knees protesting the torture chair's cruel geometry. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in around his rapidly shrinking career options. He just agreed to fake date someone whose very existence seemed designed to highlight every personality flaw he'd spent years trying to bury. 2 weeks, he said, more to himself than anyone else. 2 weeks, Dana confirmed. That's a wrap. She clicked out of the room on heels that sounded like countdown timers. Jack watched her go, then turned to find Owen still clutching his clipboard like a life preserver, and Luca practically glowing with excitement. "This is going to be amazing," Luca whispered. "You guys have such good chemistry already, and you don't even know it. The way you argue is like, if you say like an old married couple, I'm going to put you through the glass." Luca's grin widened. "I was going to say like characters in my favorite enemies to lovers fic, but old married couple works too." Jack headed for the door, every step feeling like he was walking deeper into quicksand. Owen fell into step behind him, which was somehow more irritating than if he'd stayed put. "We need to establish boundaries," Owen said quietly. His clipboard wasn't quite pressed against his chest anymore, but it still looked like a shield. "Clear expectations about what this performance entails." Jack pushed through the door, leading back toward the main corridor. "Boundaries. All right, here's one. You stay on your side of whatever this is, and I'll stay on mine. That's not how fake dating works." Jack stopped walking and turned around. Owen nearly crashed into him, clipboard and all. "And how exactly do you know how fake dating works?" Owen's cheeks flushed pink. I read romance novels sometimes for research." "Research?" "Nutritional psychology. People's relationships with food often mirror their relationships with..." Owen caught himself, cheeks getting pinker. "Never mind." Jack stared at him. The man was a walking contradiction, organized enough to color code nutritional supplements, but somehow naive enough to take a job in professional sports without anticipating the PR nightmare potential. And now Jack's career depended on convincing strangers they were, what, in love? Attracted to each other? "This is insane," Jack muttered. "Completely," Owen agreed. They stood in the corridor, neither moving, while the reality of their situation settled around them like snow. 2 weeks of pretending. 2 weeks of sitting close and holding hands and answering questions about their non-existent relationship. 2 weeks of letting the internet believe that Jack Carter, professionally grumpy defenseman, had fallen for the team nutritionist with a clipboard addiction and a tendency to reorganize other people's space. Jack stared at the message, remembering yesterday's phone call when his agent had been less diplomatic. "3 strikes, Carter. The Calgary incident, the reporter you called a vulture in cheap shoes, and now this nutrition kid. Management's done making excuses. One more public blow-up, and your contract's void under the conduct clause." "No pressure." "Saturday," he said finally, 6 p.m., business casual." Owen nodded. I'll try to be comfortable with the physical contact thing." "Don't make it weird." "I won't make it weird if you don't make it weird." They looked at each other for another long moment. Owen's glasses had slipped down his nose again, and Jack found himself noticing how the fluorescent lighting caught the gold flecks in his eyes, which was exactly the kind of observation that was going to make this whole situation infinitely more complicated. "I need coffee," Jack said abruptly. "The Keurig in there sounds like it's dying. Everything in this place is dying." Jack walked away before Owen could respond, before he could say something else logical and reasonable that would somehow make this nightmare even more surreal. 2 weeks. He could survive 2 weeks of anything. Probably.
Chapter 3, Cuddling for the Cameras. Owen checked his watch for the 4th time in 2 minutes, then immediately regretted it because checking your watch was probably not the body language of someone excited to see their boyfriend. Fake boyfriend, performance partner, whatever Jack was supposed to be in this elaborate theater production that was somehow his life now. He adjusted his cardigan, forest green, because Dana had texted him color coordination suggestions at 6 a.m. like some sort of PR fairy godmother, and peered through the window of Brew and Blue lines. The coffee shop looked exactly like what would happen if a hockey arena and a Pinterest board had a caffeinated baby. Vintage skates hung from the ceiling alongside framed jerseys, and the chalkboard menu promised lattes with foam art shaped like pucks and hockey sticks. Even the sugar dispensers were shaped like tiny Zambonis. Through the glass, he could see other customers scattered throughout the space, most wearing some version of Kodiak's gear and looking like they belonged in this aggressively themed shrine to hockey culture. Owen belonged here about as much as a vegan appetizer at a barbecue competition. His phone buzzed. "Running 3 men late. Don't panic." Don't panic, right? Because nothing about the situation warranted panic. It was just fake dating for the cameras with a man who looked at him like he was a particularly irritating strain of influenza in public, where people could see them fail spectacularly at pretending to be romantically involved. Owen took a deep breath and pushed through the door. A bell chimed overhead, and the rich smell of espresso mixed with something that might have been cinnamon rolls hit him immediately. The barista, a college-aged girl with blue streaks in her hair and a Kodiak's apron, looked up and did a double take. "Oh my God, you're Owen from the video." He crept up Owen's neck. The video. Of course everyone had seen the video. He managed what he hoped was a normal smile. "That's me." "Are you meeting Jack? Is it true you guys are—" She gestured vaguely, eyes bright with curiosity. Yes. Meeting Jack. For coffee." Owen clutched his clipboard tighter, then realized he was clutching his clipboard at a romantic coffee date and forced himself to relax his grip. "Just coffee." The barista grinned. "That's so crazy. Everyone's been talking about it. In a good way. Like, who would have thought Jack Carter would—" The bell chimed again, and Jack walked in like he was enemy territory. His team hoodie hung loose over dark jeans, and he wore his usual beanie pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. He scanned the room with the systematic thoroughness of someone checking for snipers, then spotted Owen and headed toward the back corner booth. "Performance art," he muttered as he slid into the booth across from Owen. "This is performance art, and I'm the unwilling installation." Owen bit back a smile. "Good morning to you, too." "It's barely morning. It's practically dawn." Jack pulled off his beanie and ran a hand through his hair, leaving it sticking up at odd angles. "Why do we have to do this at a coffee shop? Why can't we fake dates somewhere with normal lighting and no witnesses?" "Because the point is witnesses." Owen glanced around the shop, noting the way conversations had gotten quieter. Phones were appearing on tables, and the barista was practically vibrating with excitement behind the counter. "We're supposed to be seen being couple—" Jack's expression suggested couple Y ranked somewhere below root canal on his list of preferred activities. "Right, couple Y." He picked up the menu and frowned at it. "What the hell is a hat-trick mocha?" "I think it has 3 shots." Owen and Jack, they both turned toward the voice. Dana approached her table like a woman on a mission, which she was. Behind her trailed a photographer Owen didn't recognize, a thin man with expensive-looking equipment and the slightly manic energy of someone who drank too much caffeine for a living. "Perfect timing," Dana announced, sliding uninvited into the booth next to Owen. The photographer hovered nearby, already adjusting camera settings. "Marcus here's from Cold Pines Lifestyle. Very reputable, very discreet." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "I specialize in authentic relationship photography, candid moments, natural interaction, real romantic energy." Jack stared at him. "Authentic fake relationship photography." "Well, yes." Marcus seemed unfazed by the contradiction. "The goal is to capture genuine affection between you two." "Genuine fake affection," Jack clarified. Owen watched the exchange with growing dread. This was going to be a disaster. Jack looked like he was plotting the photographer's demise, and Owen felt like he was about to perform Shakespeare in a language he didn't speak. Dana reached into her bag and produced what Owen could only describe as a ceramic crime against humanity. It was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal coffee mug, decorated with cartoon hockey players sharing a heart-shaped puck. Glittery letters spelled out Power Play Partners in fonts that hurt to look at. "Couple prop," Dana said, placing the monstrosity on the table between them. "Visual reinforcement of the romantic theme." Jack stared at the mug like it might detonate. "You want us to drink out of that?" "I want you to look like you're enjoying drinking out of that." Dana signaled to the barista, 2 hat-trick, mochas, extra foam art, served in the special mug. Owen reached for the mug tentatively. It was even worse up close. The cartoon hockey players had unnaturally large eyes and rosy cheeks, and the heart-shaped puck had tiny cupid wings. "This is subtle," Jack said flatly. "Marketing genius," Dana corrected. "Marcus, let's start with some casual conversation shots. Natural positioning, relaxed body language." Owen forced his brightest smile, the one he usually reserved for explaining why protein powder wasn't actually toxic, and placed his hand near Jack's shoulder. Not on it, because that felt presumptuous, but hovering in the general vicinity like he was afraid Jack might burst into flames. Jack sat rigid as a statue, staring at the offensive mug with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. His jaw was set, His shoulders were up around his ears, and everything about his posture screamed, "I am being held against my will." Marcus started clicking away. "Beautiful. Could you lean in a little closer, Owen? And Jack, maybe look at your boyfriend?" Jack turned his head toward Owen with the mechanical precision of a rusty hinge. His expression suggested he was attending his own funeral. "Perfect," Marcus lied enthusiastically. "Hold that." Owen's smile stretched so wide his cheeks began to ache. This was torture. They looked ridiculous. Everyone in the coffee shop was staring, and not in the, "oh, cute couple" way Dana was probably hoping for, more in the, "are those two being held hostage" way. "Let me get a few shots of you sharing the mug," Marcus directed. "Intimate drinking, maybe some eye contact." Ooh. Owen reached for the Power Play partner's mug at the same time Jack did. Their hands collided, and Jack jerked back like he'd been electrocuted. Owen fumbled the mug, caught it, then realized he was now holding this ridiculous prop by himself while Jack glared at his own treacherous hands. "This is going great," someone said loudly from across the coffee shop. "Really natural chemistry." Bowen looked over to find Luca Pena leaning against the counter, grinning like he'd stumbled onto the entertainment event of the season. He had his phone out and was clearly documenting their romantic catastrophe for posterity. "I'm starting a betting pool," Luca announced to the coffee shop at large. "How long before they break character?" "I've got 2 minutes." Several nearby customers laughed. A woman at a corner table called out, 30 seconds. "I'll take 5 minutes, offered someone else. "Carter looks like he's about to run for the exit." Jack's expression darkened dangerously. Owen watched his hands clench into fists on the table and realized they were about 30 seconds away from a scene that would make their original fight look like friendly banter. "Just pretend I'm someone you actually like," Owen said quietly, leaning closer and placing his hand gently on Jack's arm. The contact was warm, solid, unexpectedly grounding. Jack turned to look at him and something shifted in his expression. The rigid fury softened slightly, like ice cracking around the edges. "Someone I actually like," Jack repeated, voice low enough that Marcus had to stop clicking to strain for audio. "Anyone," Owen said, keeping his voice soft and his hand steady on Jack's arm. "Your favorite teammate. Your dog?" "Don't have a dog." "Okay, bad example. Your favorite food?" Jack's mouth twitched slightly. "Pizza." "Pizza!" Owen agreed solemnly. "Pretend I'm pizza." The corner of Jack's mouth almost curved upward. "Pizza doesn't reorganize my fridge." "No, pizza just disappears mysteriously from fridges." Owen found himself genuinely smiling. Much more mysterious, very suspicious behavior from pizza. Terrible commitment issues? The worst. Here 1 minute, gone the next. Jack's shoulders relaxed, fractionally. When he reached for the offensive couple's mug this time, he didn't jerk away when Owen's fingers brushed his. The contact sent an unexpected flutter through Owen's chest, warm and brief and entirely inappropriate for their fake relationship arrangement. "Better!" Marcus called out. "This is much better." Owen maintained that positioning. "Jack, you almost look not miserable." "I'm thinking about pizza," Jack muttered, but there was less edge in his voice. Their next round of photos felt different. Owen's smile became genuine as he watched Jack awkwardly attempt to look romantic. The man held the ridiculous mug like it was made of nitroglycerin and kept glancing at Owen like he was expecting instructions. It was endearing in an entirely unexpected way. Jack seemed less like he was being tortured and more like he was tolerating an amusing inconvenience. When Owen laughed at his muttered commentary about the coffee shop's aggressive commitment to hockey puns, Jack's expression softened further. "The sugar dispensers are shaped like Zambonis," Jack said quietly. "That's not thematic commitment. That's psychological obsession." Owen followed his gaze to the condiment station where tiny Zambonis did indeed dispense sugar packets. "I think it's charming." "You what?" But there was no heat in it, almost fondness? Owen caught himself staring at Jack's profile and forced his attention back to the photographer. "Let's take a break," Marcus announced. "These last shots are fantastic." Very authentic, romantic energy. Dana nodded approvingly from her surveillance position. "Much improvement. I'm seeing actual chemistry now." Owen felt heat creep up his neck. "Chemistry. right? Performance chemistry, not actual chemistry, because that would be ridiculous and complicated and completely against the rules they'd established about staying on the respective sides of whatever this was. Jack was absently running his thumb along the rim of the Power Play Partners mug, staring out the window at the street beyond. He held it carefully now, like it was actual ceramic instead of a PR prop. The change in his handling was subtle but noticeable. Less disgust, more acceptance. Excuse me? Owen looked up to find a girl of maybe 10 standing next to their booth, clutching a Kodiak's jersey and looking nervous. Her mother hovered nearby, phone ready, but trying to look casual about it. Could you both sign my jersey? The girl asked. I'm Emma, and I'm a huge Kodiak's fan, and I think it's really cool that you guys are together because my mom says love comes in all different ways, and of course, Owen said quickly before Jack could respond with something that might traumatize a child. He accepted the jersey and a pen from Emma's mother. What position do you play? Emma's face lit up. Right wing. I'm the leading scorer on my team. That's awesome. Owen signed his name next to the Kodiak's logo, then hesitated. Should he write something couple? Something about Jack? This whole situation was a minefield of potential mistakes. Jack leaned closer, close enough that their shoulders bumped, close enough that Owen caught the scent of his soap and something else, something warm and distinctly Jack. The contact felt natural this time, unconscious, like Jack had forgotten they were supposed to maintain careful distance. Mind if I? Jack reached for the jersey, and Owen handed it over. Owen watched Jack sign with surprisingly neat handwriting, his usual gruff demeanor softening as he talked to Emma about hockey. The man was good with kids, patient, encouraging, genuinely interested in her stories about her team and her favorite players. It was attractive in a way Owen hadn't expected. Attractive, that was problematic. They chatted with Emma for a few more minutes, Jack offering tips about improving her slap shot, Owen listening with genuine interest to her detailed explanation of her team's playoff strategy. When she and her mother finally left, both Owen and Jack remained in their naturally close positions, shoulders still touching. She's got good instincts, Jack said, watching Emma through the window as she proudly showed her signed jersey to her mother. Kids always know more about hockey than adults give them credit for. Owen nodded, hyper-aware of the warmth where their arms touched. You're good with kids, Jack shrugged. Kids don't expect you to be anyone other than who you are. The simple honesty of it caught Owen off guard. For a moment, Jack looked younger, less guarded, less like the intimidating professional athlete and more like just Jack, a person who was good with kids and held ridiculous coffee mugs more carefully than he admitted and maybe wasn't as irredeemably grumpy as he pretended to be. That's a wrap for today, Marcus announced, packing up his equipment. I got some great shots, very authentic romantic chemistry. There was that word again. Chemistry. Owen glanced at Jack, who was already pulling his beanie back on and returning to his usual closed-off posture. The moment of openness disappeared behind familiar walls. Same time next week? Dana asked, gathering her things with the efficiency of someone who had successfully managed another minor crisis. Owen nodded automatically. Jack grunted something that might have been agreement. As they packed up to leave, Owen realized he spent the last hour genuinely enjoying Jack's dry commentary about the coffee shop's theme park approach to sports marketing, and his surprisingly insightful observations about their fellow customers. The realization came with a flutter of something that felt suspiciously like disappointment when Jack immediately returned to his usual gruff distance. They walked toward the door together, close enough that their sleeves brushed, but far enough apart to maintain plausible deniability. Owen held the door for Jack, who paused in the doorway and looked back at the Power Play Partners mug still sitting on their table. The thing is an abomination, Jack said. Complete aesthetic terrorism, Owen agreed. Jack's mouth twitched again, that almost smile that made Owen's chest flutter inappropriately. Then he pulled his beanie lower and walked out into the cold morning air, leaving Owen standing in the doorway, wondering when exactly he'd started looking forward to making Jack Carter almost smile. But this was going to be more complicated than he'd thought.
Chapter 4. One bed, no chill. The bus wheezed to a stop in front of what could generously be called a lodge if someone squinted hard enough and had low expectations. Jack pressed his face against the fogged window and stared at Blackwood Pines Lodge, 2 stories of rustic timber that looked like it hadn't seen an update since the Carter administration. Which Carter, he wasn't sure, but definitely one of the dead ones. Snow clung to the sagging eaves and piled against windows that might have been charming in a postcard, but looked drafty as hell in person. The whole place screamed team-building nightmare, and Dana's cost-cutting spreadsheets made manifest. Perfect. Jack shouldered his duffel and followed the stream of teammates off the bus, boots crunching through snow that was already falling harder than the weather app had predicted. The wind cut through his jacket like it had a personal grudge, and he hunched his shoulders against the cold inside. The lobby managed to be both too warm and somehow still drafty, all knotty pine walls and furniture that looked like it had been carved by someone who'd learned woodworking from a YouTube video. A cheerful woman behind the front desk, blonde, aggressively perky, wearing a name tag that read Brittany in looping cursive, waved them all over with a kind of enthusiasm that made Jack immediately suspicious. "Welcome, Kodiaks. I'm so excited to have you all here for your team retreat." Brittany's voice could have powered a small wind turbine. "I've got your room assignments right here, and I just know you're going to love our rustic accommodations." Jack tuned out most of the chatter about amenities and meal schedules, assuming he'd get his usual single-room arrangement. He specifically requested it when Dana had strong-armed the team into this mandatory bonding experience. Privacy was non-negotiable, especially when dealing with teammates who thought sharing feelings was a competitive sport. "Let's see," Brittany chirped, consulting her clipboard with theatrical enthusiasm. "Rodriguez and Bennett, room 3. Thompson and Williams, room 7. Carter and Lane, room 12. Jack's stomach dropped somewhere around his ankles. "Wait, what?" The words came out sharper than he'd intended, drawing attention from nearby teammates. A few of them smirked knowingly, which made Jack's jaw clench. "Carter and Lane," Brittany repeated with the same relentless cheer. "Room 12, second floor, lovely view of the pine trees." Jack spun around, scanning the lobby until he spotted Dana standing near the stone fireplace, looking perfectly composed while reviewing something on her phone. He stalked over, ignoring the interested looks from his teammates. "Kim." He kept his voice low, but couldn't quite hide the edge. "Why am I rooming with Lane?" Dana didn't look up from her phone. "Because you're dating him. We're fake dating him. There's a difference." "Not this weekend, there isn't." She finally glanced up, her expression as unreadable as always. "This is perfect for maintaining your couple narrative. Consider it method acting." "I don't do method acting." "You do now." Dana's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "It's non-negotiable, Carter. The whole point of this retreat is team bonding, and nothing says believable relationship like sharing accommodations." Jack opened his mouth to argue further when he felt someone appear beside him. Owen stood there with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder and his reading glasses sliding down his nose, looking like he'd rather face a firing squad than discuss sleeping arrangements. "Hey," Owen said, adjusting his glasses with the kind of nervous precision that suggested he'd heard at least part of their conversation. "I'm totally fine with the arrangement, really. It's not a big deal." Everything about Owen's body language screamed that it was, in fact, a very big deal, but he was determined to be professional about it. His shoulders were tense, his smile a little too bright, and he kept fidgeting with the strap of his bag. "See?" Dana's tone suggested the matter was settled. "Lane's fine with it, you'll be fine with it, everyone's fine." Jack wasn't fine with it, but arguing would draw more attention, and he'd already made enough scenes for 1 week. He grunted something that might have been agreement and shouldered his bag more aggressively than necessary. "Great, room 12 it is," Owen said with determinedly cheerful acceptance. "I'm sure it'll be cozy." Cozy turned out to be a generous interpretation. Room 12 was barely larger than a closet, dominated by a single queen bed that took up most of the available floor space. The walls were more knotty pine because apparently the lodge had bought in bulk, and one small window offered a view of snow-laden trees that would have been picturesque if Jack had been in the mood for scenery. What he was in the mood for was a stiff drink and a room with 2 beds, preferably in different buildings. "Oh," Owen said quietly, standing in the doorway behind Jack. "That's 1 bed." "Yep." Jack dropped his duffel on the narrow strip of floor between the bed and the wall, frustration building in his chest. This whole situation was ridiculous. He was a professional athlete, not a teenager at summer camp. "I can take the floor." Owen offered immediately, his default sunny politeness kicking in despite the obvious awkwardness. Really, it's no problem. I've slept in worse places. Jack looked at the hardwood floor, then at Owen's earnest expression, then back at the floor. The kid was being reasonable as usual, which made Jack feel like even more of an ass for being irritated about the whole thing. "Floor's going to be cold as hell," he said gruffly, "and you'll complain about your back tomorrow." "I don't complain. Everyone complains about sleeping on floors. It's biology." Jack surveyed the bed with the kind of strategic thinking he usually reserved for defensive plays. "We'll split it. Pillow barricade down the middle." Owen blinked. "A pillow barricade?" "The DMZ," Jack said, already moving around the room to collect every available pillow and cushion. "Demilitarized zone. You stay on your side, I stay on mine. Nobody crosses the line." He began constructing the barrier with military precision, stacking pillows and arranging them in a neat row down the center of the bed. It was probably overkill, but Jack had always believed in clear boundaries, especially when dealing with situations that made his chest feel tight and weird. "That's very thorough," Owen observed, watching Jack place the final pillow with geometric accuracy. "I like clear lines," Jack said. "No confusion, no accidental contact." The word contact came out rougher than he'd intended, and Owen's cheeks flushed slightly. They both stood there for a moment, staring at the pillow wall like it was a crucial piece of military hardware. On the outside, the wind picked up, rattling the small window and sending snow swirling against the glass. The weather was deteriorating faster than predicted, and Jack could hear the lodge's ancient heating system making ominous groaning sounds from somewhere in the walls. "Right," Owen said finally. "Clear boundaries. Got it." They unpacked in relative silence, moving around each other with careful politeness in the cramped space. Jack hung his clothes in the tiny closet, while Owen arranged his things on the single dresser with his usual methodical organization. Everything had a place and a purpose, even his travel-size tea collection, which he lined up like tiny soldiers on the windowsill. The heating system gave a particularly loud groan, followed by a sound like metal grinding against metal. "That doesn't sound good," Owen said, pausing his unpacking. Jack grunted in agreement. "Probably hasn't been serviced since the Clinton administration." "Which Clinton?" "Either one." They continued getting ready for bed with a kind of awkward choreography that came from sharing space with someone who was supposed to be your fake boyfriend, but was actually just your colleague who you'd yelled at about organized fridges. Jack changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt while Owen was in the tiny bathroom, then retreated to his side of the pillow wall when Owen emerged in flannel pajama pants and a soft-looking long-sleeve shirt. The cell service, which had been spotty in the lobby, died completely as the blizzard intensified. The lodge felt increasingly isolated, cut off from the outside world by walls of snow and wind. "Well," Owen said, settling carefully on his side of the bed, "at least we won't be disturbed by work calls." Jack lay down on his side of the DMZ, hyper-aware of the fact that there was another person 3 feet away. 3 feet and a wall of pillows, but still. He could hear everything, the rustle of Owen's pajamas as he got comfortable, the soft sigh as he settled under the blankets, the quiet way he breathed. It was distracting. Jack stared at the ceiling and tried to focus on literally anything else: the sound of wind against the window, the groaning heating system, the faint creaking of the lodge settling around them. But his attention kept drifting back to the sounds from the other side of the pillow wall. Owen was a quiet sleeper. No snoring, no tossing and turning. Just a steady rhythm of breathing that gradually deepened as he fell asleep. It was oddly soothing, though Jack would never admit that out loud. Sleep came eventually, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the storm raging outside. Jack woke sometime in the deep hours of the night to the realization that something was very wrong with the pillow situation. Specifically, there were no pillows between him and Owen. More specifically, he was pressed against Owen's back, his arm draped over the smaller man's waist, Owen's warmth seeping through his t-shirt like heat through thin metal. At some point during the night, his unconscious self had apparently decided that the DMZ was more of a suggestion than a hard boundary. Jack froze, expecting Owen to jolt awake and scramble away in horror, but Owen remained deeply asleep, his breathing steady and peaceful. As Jack lay there in panic mode, Owen made a small, contented sound and unconsciously leaned back into Jack's solid presence, like seeking warmth was the most natural thing in the world. The smart thing to do would be to immediately extract himself, rebuild the pillow barrier, and pretend this never happened. Instead, Jack found himself taking inventory. Owen fit against him in a way that was both surprising and oddly natural, smaller but solid, warm and real in a way that made something unfamiliar shift in Jack's chest. He smelled faintly of his tea bags and something clean and warm that Jack couldn't identify but found unexpectedly appealing. Without meaning to, Jack noticed the way Owen's hair stuck up at odd angles where it had rubbed against the pillow, the way his breathing created tiny puffs of warmth against Jack's arm, the way he seemed completely unguarded in sleep, none of his careful, professional politeness or nervous energy in evidence. It was nice, which was problematic for approximately 17 different reasons. Jack allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of this highly inappropriate observation, then carefully began the process of extraction. Owen's unconscious trust as he remained relaxed against Jack's warmth felt both terrifying and oddly right, which was exactly the kind of thinking that led to poor life choices and complicated workplace situations. He managed to slip his arm away without waking Owen, though the smaller man made a soft sound of protest at the loss of warmth. Jack immediately began rebuilding the pillow barrier, replacing each cushion with the same military precision he'd used earlier. And then he lay back down on his side of the DMZ and stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night, hyper-aware of Owen's quiet breathing just 3 feet away and trying very hard not to think about how natural it had felt to hold someone while they slept. How natural it had felt to hold Owen while he slept. This was going to be a long weekend.
Chapter 5, Cocoa and Confessions. When Owen woke to the gentle patter of snow against the window and the peculiar quiet that came with being thoroughly snowed in. The blizzard had intensified overnight, turning the world beyond their small room into a wall of white that pressed against the glass like nature was trying to break in. The pillow barricade had somehow rebuilt itself during the night, every cushion precisely placed, the DMZ restored to its original state. Jack's side of the bed was empty, covers pulled tight with military precision, as if he'd been gone for hours. Owen blinked at the reconstructed fortress, trying to piece together fragments of warmth and safety from his dreams that felt too real to ignore. Had he imagined the solid presence against his back? The feeling of being held while he slept? It seemed unlikely that Jack would voluntarily breach his own carefully constructed boundaries, but Owen's body held the memory of warmth that went beyond shared blankets. He shook off the thought and padded to the window. Outside, the storm showed no signs of relenting. If anything, it had gotten worse. The kind of blizzard that turned weekend retreats into extended captivity. Owen could make out the shapes of snow-buried cars in the lodge's parking area, completely entombed under drifts that reached halfway up their windows. They weren't going anywhere today. After pulling on layers that would make him look like a hiking catalog model, cardigan over thermal, wool socks under his slippers, Owen made his way downstairs with his emergency travel tin tucked under his arm. The lodge felt different in daylight, smaller somehow, as if the storm had pressed the walls closer together. The main room centered around a massive stone fireplace where flames danced and crackled, throwing shifting patterns of light across pine walls and rustic furniture. A few teammates had claimed the area like refugees from a shipwreck. Marcus sprawled across a leather couch with a deck of cards. Tyler hunched over his dead phone as if willing it back to life, and Hendricks staring mournfully out the frosted windows. "Cell service is completely shot," Marcus announced without looking up from his cards. "We're officially cut off from civilization." "This is what people did before smartphones," Owen pointed out, settling into a worn armchair in the corner that gave him a perfect view of both the fire and the room's entrances. "They talked to each other, played games, read books." "Did they have Netflix?" Tyler asked hopefully. "They had stories. Stories don't have special effects." Owen shook his head and opened his emergency tin with the reverence of a ritual. The battered container had seen him through clinical rotations, late-night study sessions, and countless moments when the world felt too overwhelming to handle without intervention. Faded glitter stars caught the firelight, and motivational stickers from various eras of his life created a collage of determined optimism. "You got this! One day at a time. Nutrition is love." The last one was slightly peeling and had been added during his first week with the Kodiaks, back when he'd still believed that protein powder and positive thinking could solve any problem. Inside the tin, everything had its place. Packets of premium cocoa powder. Not the watery stuff from vending machines, but the real thing that dissolved into silk. Mini marshmallows in a small mason jar, peppermint stirrers wrapped in individual packets, a few backup tea bags for emergencies. Everything organized with the precision of someone who'd learned that comfort was something you carried with you, not something you waited to find. Owen was halfway through preparing his first mug when the lodge's front door banged open, letting in a swirl of snow and cold air that made everyone by the fire huddle closer together. Jack appeared in the doorway, like something summoned from the storm itself. Beanie pulled low, shoulders dusted with white, looking like he'd been outside wrestling the elements rather than accepting the simple fact that they were trapped indoors like civilized people. "What the hell have you been?" Marcus called out. "It's a blizzard, not a training session." Jack shrugged off his coat and kicked snow from his boots, his usual response to questions he didn't feel like answering. His cheeks were flushed from cold, and when he pulled off his beanie, his dark hair stuck up at angles that suggested he'd been battling wind for the better part of the morning. Owen watched him survey the room, noting the way Jack's gaze skipped over the available seating near the other guys and landed on the chair across from Owen's corner spot. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Owen with a steaming mug in his hands, Jack looking like a refugee from an Arctic expedition. "Hot chocolate," Owen offered, gesturing to his setup with the practiced ease of someone who'd made this offer 100 times before. "It's the good stuff, not lodge powder." Jack's response was a grunt that might have passed for gratitude in some cultures, but he moved toward the chair without his usual resistance. No complaints about emotional manipulation or unnecessary sugar. He just settled heavily into the cushions, close enough that Owen could see snowflakes melting in his hair. Owen prepared the second mug with the same careful attention he'd given his own. Cocoa powder measured precisely, hot water from the lodge's ancient coffee station whisked until smooth. Mini marshmallows floated on top like tiny clouds. The peppermint stirrer went in last, a candy, striped exclamation point that somehow made everything feel more festive. When he handed over the mug, Jack wrapped his fingers around it like it was a heat source rather than a beverage. His hands were still cold from whatever outdoor adventure he'd been on, and Owen found himself watching the way Jack's shoulders gradually relaxed as warmth seeped into his system. The fire crackled between them, while voices from the other side of the room faded into background noise. Marcus had started a game of solitaire that was apparently worth running commentary. Tyler had given up on his phone and was now examining the lodge's collection of outdated magazines. Hendricks had fallen asleep in his chair, snoring softly against a cushion. But in their corner, something quieter was happening. Jack stared into the flames with the intensity of someone reading secrets in the shifting light, occasionally sipping his cocoa but mostly just holding it. The peppermint stir caught firelight, sending small rainbows across his hands. Owen found himself studying Jack's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his permanent scowl had softened into something more thoughtful, the small scar above his left eyebrow that Owen had never noticed before. Without the usual tension radiating from him, Jack looked younger somehow, less like a fortress and more like a person carrying a weight he didn't know how to put down. "I started carrying this during my clinical days," Owen heard himself saying, gesturing to the tin that sat open between them like an offering. The words came without permission, spilling out before he could consider whether Jack actually wanted to hear his origin story. "Back when I thought nutrition could fix everything, if you just applied it correctly." Jack's gaze flicked from the fire to Owen's face, then back to the flames. He didn't interrupt, didn't make his usual comment about emotional manipulation or unnecessary sharing. He just listened. "I was working in a hospital," Ellen continued, surprised by his own voice. "Long-term care unit. People who were there for months, sometimes longer. I'd create these perfect meal plans, balanced macros, appealing presentations, everything designed to help them get stronger. And they just push it away." The memory came back with unexpected clarity. Sterile hallways, the sound of monitors beeping, the way hope felt heavier than despair because you had to carry it even when it served no purpose. There was this one patient. We've been there for 3 months after a stroke. Family visited every day, brought pictures, talked about fishing trips they'd take when he got better. I designed this entire nutrition protocol around his recovery goals. Owen's hands tightened around his mug. He just stopped eating. Not because the food was bad or the plan was wrong, he just gave up. Jack took a slow sip of his cocoa, marshmallow slowly dissolving on his tongue. Owen couldn't read his expression, but he wasn't looking at the fire anymore. I'd watched people ignore everything I planned for them and slowly waste away, and I felt completely useless, despite all my training and good intentions. Like I was standing there with solutions and watching people choose to suffer instead. The words were coming faster now, years of carefully buried frustration bubbling up in the warmth of firelight and unexpected quiet. The worst part wasn't that people gave up. It was that I couldn't understand why they wouldn't let me help them. I had degrees, certifications, evidence-based protocols. I knew exactly what their bodies needed to heal, and they'd look right through me like I was suggesting something impossible. Owen stared into his own mug, watching many marshmallows slowly dissolve into sweet white foam. I started carrying the cocoa kit because it was the only thing that worked, not the meal plans or the nutrition education or the carefully calculated supplements, just hot chocolate and someone sitting with them for 10 minutes without trying to fix anything. Jack's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. But you still left. It wasn't a question, and Owen appreciated that Jack didn't try to dress it up as curiosity. I left because I couldn't handle watching patients give up on themselves when I knew exactly how to help them get better. It felt like watching people choose to drown while I stood on the shore, holding life preservers they wouldn't reach for. Owen set his mug down on the small table between their chairs, the clink of ceramic against wood unnaturally loud in their little pocket of conversation. So I rebuilt my life one smoothie and sticker at a time until I found something that felt manageable again. Sports nutrition was supposed to be easier. Working with people who actually wanted to get stronger, who'd follow protocols because their careers depended on it. He glanced around the room where his current charges were sprawled in various states of retreat boredom, then back at Jack. Turns out athletes can be just as good at self-sabotage as anyone else. They're just more creative about it. Jack made a sound that might have been amusement or recognition or both. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it felt heavy with understanding that Owen wasn't sure he'd earned. He just dumped 3 years of professional disappointment on someone who guarded his own stories with the intensity of state secrets, and now he was sitting here wondering if he'd revealed too much to someone who might not care about the emotional casualties of other people's caring. But Jack hadn't walked away. He'd listened without interrupting, without making jokes or deflecting with sarcasm. He'd just sat there and absorbed Owen's carefully buried failures like they were worth hearing. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice quieter than Owen had ever heard it. "Saw you put those damn stickers on everything." It wasn't a question, no curiosity or confusion in his tone, just recognition. Like he'd been watching Owen's small rituals of encouragement and had finally found the missing piece that made them make sense. Owen felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Yeah," he said simply. "That's why I put stickers on everything." Jack nodded once, then returned his attention to the fire. But something had changed in the space between them. Not warmer, exactly, but more honest, like they'd accidentally stumbled into seeing each other instead of just sharing space. Owen picked up his mug again and settled back into his chair, watching Jack watch the flames and feeling both exposed and cautiously hopeful that maybe Jack actually saw him. Not the cheerful team nutritionist with his clipboards and motivational strategies, but the person who carried emergency chocolate because sometimes comfort was the only help people would accept. The fire crackled between them while the storm continued to rage outside, and Owen found himself thinking that being snowed in might not be the disaster he'd originally thought.
Chapter 6, Game of Truths. Jack had been perfectly content sitting by the fire, processing Owen's unexpected honesty and the way it had settled something restless in his chest, when Luca appeared like a sugar-fueled tornado. "Game time," Luca announced, clapping his hands together with the enthusiasm of someone who'd clearly raided the lodge's emergency candy stash. "Everyone to the game room. We're doing this properly." "Doing what properly?" Jack asked, though he already suspected he wasn't going to like the answer. Team bonding, obviously. Luca was practically vibrating with excitement. "Come on, Carter. Even you can't be grumpy about a friendly game." Jack could absolutely be grumpy about a friendly game, especially when Luca's definition of friendly usually involved emotional manipulation disguised as entertainment. But Owen was already standing, stretching in a way that made his sweater ride up slightly, and somehow Jack found himself following the general migration toward the lodge's disaster of a game room. The space looked like someone had given up halfway through a renovation project. Mismatched furniture had been dragged into a rough circle, ranging from actual chairs to what appeared to be a repurposed ottoman and something that might have been a stepladder with a cushion tied to it. String lights hung at random intervals, giving the whole setup the ambiance of a college dorm room designed by someone with commitment issues. "This looks like a fire hazard," Jack said, eyeing a chair that was held together mostly by duct tape and optimism. "This looks like magic," Luca countered, producing an empty beer bottle from somewhere and setting it in the center of their makeshift circle with ceremonial reverence. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted emotionally constipated hockey players, welcome to Truth or Dare for Grown-Ups." "We're not grown-ups," said Tommy, settling into what looked like the most structurally sound chair. "We're professional athletes." "There's a difference." "Exactly why we need adult supervision." Luca gestured grandly at the bottle. "Civilized rules apply. No nudity, no property damage, no making anyone call their ex. Everything else is fair game." Jack felt his jaw clench automatically. He'd rather take a slap shot to the face than participate in organized emotional vulnerability, but short of storming out like a child having a tantrum, he was trapped. He chose a chair that looked like it could support his weight and tried to project the kind of hostile energy that typically discouraged people from including him in group activities. Unfortunately, Luca had built up an immunity to Jack's hostile energy after 3 years of cheerfully ignoring every signal Jack sent that he wanted to be left alone. "Carter, you're sitting next to Owen. How romantic." Luca's grin was sharp enough to cut glass. "Just like a real couple." Owen slid into the chair beside him with minimal fuss, clipboard balanced on his knees like armor. Jack could smell faint traces of peppermint and something warm that might have been vanilla, probably from whatever magical cocoa blend Owen had been hoarding. "First Ben," Luca declared, giving the bottle an enthusiastic twist. What followed was 40 minutes of escalating chaos masquerading as team building. The first few rounds stayed mercifully surface, level-himping jumping jacks in his pajama pants. Marcus admitting he'd once gotten lost in their own arena during rookie orientation. Kai reluctantly revealing that he kept a lucky sock from junior hockey that he still wore for important games. But Jack could read the room's energy like he read plays on the ice. The questions were getting more personal, the dares more revealing, and Lucas' expression more calculating with each spin. This was heading somewhere specific, and Jack had a sinking feeling he knew exactly where. The bottle spun lazily across the uneven floor, its neck tracing a slow arc past Marcus, past Owen, past Tommy, before finally settling with devastating precision on Jack. Jack stared at the bottle like it had personally betrayed him. Around the circle, his teammates perked up, with the predatory interest of people who rarely got the chance to crack open the team's most private player. "Truth or dare, Carter?" Luca's voice was pure innocence wrapped around gleeful anticipation. Jack considered his options. Dare would probably involve some humiliating physical challenge designed to make him look ridiculous. Truth would involve emotional excavation that he had no intention of participating in. Both were terrible choices, but at least Truth wouldn't require him to do push-ups in his underwear. "Truth," he said, immediately regretting it when Luca's grin widened to genuinely alarming proportions. "Perfect." Luca leaned forward like he was settling in to watch his favorite movie. "Truth, what's the most surprising thing about dating?" "Owen." The question hung in the air like smoke, and Jack felt every eye in the room turn toward him with varying degrees of curiosity and entertainment. This was exactly the kind of performance moment he'd signed up for when they'd agreed to this ridiculous PR stunt. The opportunity to sell their fake relationship with carefully crafted answers designed to sound romantic and believable. He should deflect with humor. Make some joke about Owen's obsession with nutritional stickers or his habit of talking to kitchen appliances. Keep it light, keep it surface level, keep it fake enough that no one would dig deeper, but real enough that people would buy the act. Instead, Jack found himself looking across the circle at Owen, who was watching him with those expressive eyes that seemed to catalog every micro-expression and file it away for later analysis. Owen's clipboard had slipped forgotten into his lap, and he was holding himself very still in the way he did when he was trying not to influence the outcome of something important. The honest answer rose in Jack's throat before he could stop it. "It makes me want to be less of an asshole." The words fell into the room like a stone into still water, and the resulting silence was so complete Jack could hear the wind rattling windows somewhere deeper in the lodge. He'd expected to deliver a performance, but what had come out instead was something raw and true that he hadn't even admitted to himself until this moment. Around the circle, his teammates stared at him with expressions ranging from surprise to something that looked suspiciously like actual emotion. Even Luca had temporarily lost his smart-ass grin, replaced by wide-eyed fascination at having accidentally extracted genuine honesty from the team's most emotionally unavailable player. Jack's chest felt tight, like he'd just admitted to a weakness that could be weaponized against him later. He'd built his entire reputation on being difficult to reach, impossible to crack, professionally uninterested in anything that didn't involve hockey and protein shakes. And here he was, voluntarily confessing to a room full of witnesses that Owen Lane made him want to be something different than what he'd always been. The weight of that admission settled over the room until Luca finally broke the moment with an overly dramatic, "Oh," that had the manufactured sweetness of someone trying to restart a stalled social machine. "That's so romantic I might actually cry," Luca announced, pressing a hand to his chest with theatrical emotion. "Write that down, someone. Carter has feelings and isn't afraid to use them." The laughter that followed felt forced but grateful, like everyone was relieved to have permission to move past the unexpected sincerity of Jack's answer. Tommy made some comment about how Owen's stickers were probably affecting Jack's brain chemistry, and Marcus started another round with enough energy to pull attention away from whatever had just happened. But through the noise and deflection, Jack caught Owen's expression. Surprise, yes, but also something softer. The small smile that crossed Owen's face was nothing like his professional team-building smile or his fake dating performance smile. This one was quiet and real and directed specifically at Jack, like a secret passed between them. Jack felt something shift dangerously in his chest, a loosening of defenses he'd spent years building, because Owen wasn't looking at him like he'd just witnessed a PR performance or a calculated attempt to sell their fake relationship. Owen was looking at him like Jack had just revealed something true and worth knowing. Game continued around them, but Jack had stopped paying attention to anything except the occasional glance Owen sent his way when he thought Jack wasn't watching. Each look felt like a small electric shock, reminding Jack that whatever was happening between them had moved far beyond the boundaries of their fake dating agreement. By the time Luca finally declared the game officially over, Jack was more than ready to escape the group's scrutiny and figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with the fact that he'd just told a room full of people that Owen Lane made him want to be a better person. The walk back to their shared room felt longer than usual, both of them moving with the careful awareness of people trying not to acknowledge that something fundamental had shifted. Owen carried his ever-present clipboard but held it loosely, like he'd forgotten what it was for, while Jack found himself hyper-aware of every accidental brush of their shoulders in the narrow hallway. Their room looked exactly as they'd left it, clothes folded on their respective sides, Owen's emergency supplies neatly organized on the small dresser, Jack's carefully constructed pillow barricade running down the center of the bed, like a boundary line designed by someone who took emotional distance very seriously. Except now, the pillow wall looked ridiculous, like a fort built by children who were afraid of monsters under the bed, not two grown men who'd agreed to share a space for practical reasons. Jack sat heavily on his side of the bed, listening to Owen move around the room with his usual quiet efficiency. Owen had a routine for everything, checking his phone for messages that wouldn't come through anyway thanks to the storm, organizing his glasses and lip balm on the nightstand, changing into sleep clothes with the methodical care of someone who found comfort in predictable patterns. At night, though, there was something different in the way Owen moved, less automatic, more aware, like he was conscious of Jack watching him in a way he hadn't been before. When Owen finally turned to say goodnight, they ended up closer than either of them had planned. Jack had been about to lie back against his pillow fortress, and Owen had been reaching to turn off the lamp, and suddenly they were occupying the same space, with Owen's reading glasses catching the light and Jack finding himself close enough to count the gold flecks in Owen's eyes. This close, Jack could see the faint line where Owen had been biting his bottom lip, probably during the game, probably when Jack had been confessing things he hadn't meant to confess. Jack found his gaze drawn to the curve of Owen's mouth, soft and slightly parted, like he'd been about to say something and forgotten what it was. The kiss happened without planning or permission or any of the careful negotiation Jack usually applied to anything that involved emotional risk. One moment he was studying the shape of Owen's lips, and the next he was leaning forward, closing the distance between them with the kind of movement that felt inevitable rather than chosen. Owen met him halfway, which was either the best or worst thing that could have happened. The kiss was soft and tentative, tasting faintly of peppermint cocoa and something sweeter that was purely Owen. Jack's hand found the back of Owen's neck almost automatically, fingers threading through soft hair as everything else, the storm, the lodge, the fake dating agreement, fell away into irrelevance. Owen made a small, breathless sound that went straight through Jack like an electric current, and reality crashed down with the force of a body check against the boards. This wasn't real. This wasn't part of their agreement. Owen wasn't actually his to kiss whenever he wanted, and Jack had just crossed every boundary they'd carefully established without asking permission or considering consequences. Jack pulled back abruptly, Owen's soft exhale still warm against his lips, and immediately wanted to apologize for about 15 different things he couldn't figure out how to name. Owen sat frozen, fingertips touching his lips like he was testing to see if what had just happened was real. His reading glasses had gone slightly askew, and his eyes were wide with something that looked like surprise mixed with confusion mixed with something else. Jack was afraid to identify. Instead of dealing with any of it, Jack turned away and attacked the pillow barricade with jerky, aggressive movements, rebuilding it with twice as many pillows as before and arranging them with the kind of violence typically reserved for body checks in the corner. "Sorry," he muttered, not looking at Owen as he constructed what was probably the most elaborate pillow wall in the history of poorly thought-out sleeping arrangements. That wasn't. We agreed this was fake." Owen didn't respond, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry or confused or any other identifiable emotion. Jack could hear him settling into his side of the bed with careful, quiet movements that suggested he was trying very hard not to disturb the pillow. DMZ Jack was frantically reinforcing. The lamp clicked off, plunging them into darkness broken only by the occasional flicker of lightning outside their window. Jack lay rigidly on his back, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince himself that the lingering taste of peppermint and the ghost of Owen's small, surprised sound weren't going to replay in his head for the rest of the night. But even through his carefully rebuilt defenses, Jack couldn't escape the memory of how Owen had felt against him. Real and warm and nothing like the performance they'd been putting on for cameras and teammates. And that was the problem, wasn't it? Because whatever was happening between them had stopped being fake somewhere along the way, and Jack was terrified of what wanting something real might cost him.
Chapter 7, Silent Treatment and Slug. Owen woke to silence and an empty impression in the mattress beside him where Jack's warmth had been. The pillow barricade stood reconstructed with military precision, a wall of down and cotton that somehow managed to look accusatory in the pale morning light filtering through frosted windows. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the hallway, Jack's distinctive stomp already retreating toward the main lodge. Owen lay motionless for a moment, staring at the carefully arranged pillows that had been rebuilt sometime in the pre-dawn hours while he'd been sleeping, oblivious to Jack's emotional reconstruction project happening inches away. The faint scent of Jack's soap lingered in the cold air. Something clean and masculine that Owen had noticed during their accidental cuddling sessions, but hadn't really processed until now. It was strange how a smell could feel like both comfort and abandonment at the same time. Owen pushed himself upright, his reading glasses sliding down his nose as he surveyed the pristine pillow fortress. Not a single cushion out of place. It looked like a monument to emotional retreat, and Owen had the sinking feeling that Jack had spent considerable time and effort making sure the message was clear. Last night was a mistake that would not be repeated. He dressed slowly, pulling on yesterday's cardigan and trying to shake the hollow feeling that had settled somewhere between his ribs and his stomach. Outside, the storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world blanketed in pristine white that would have been beautiful if Owen had been in any mood to appreciate winter scenery. Breakfast was served in the lodge's main dining hall, a rustic space with exposed beams and long wooden tables that encouraged communal seating. Owen grabbed a cup of coffee and a plate he didn't particularly want, then surveyed the room for familiar faces. Jack sat 3 tables away with his back deliberately turned, his broad shoulders hunched over a bowl of oatmeal he was consuming with the same mechanical precision he applied to everything else. His dark hair was still slightly damp from what must have been an early shower, and he was wearing his team-issued, fleece-like armor against the world. Owen found an empty spot at a table populated by assistant coaches and equipment managers, people who nodded politely but didn't require a conversation. He sat down and stared at his untouched coffee, watching steam rise from the surface, while his brain replayed the previous night in agonizing detail. The kiss had been soft and unexpected and real in a way that had nothing to do with their carefully orchestrated fake relationship. Jack's hand cradling the back of his neck, the quiet catch in Jack's breath, the way everything else had fallen away except the taste of peppermint and the warmth of Jack's lips against his own. Owen had thought, hoped, that maybe the kiss meant something, that all the careful walls Jack maintained had cracked just enough to let something genuine slip through. But apparently he'd misread the situation completely, because nothing about Jack's rigid posture suggested a man who'd experienced any kind of emotional breakthrough 12 hours ago. Maybe Jack really could flip emotions on and off like a light switch. Maybe Owen had imagined the vulnerability he'd thought he'd glimpsed, the tender way Jack had touched him, the split second where Jack's guard had completely dropped. Or maybe Jack was just that good at compartmentalizing, treating intimacy like a hockey play, something that happened in the moment and then got filed away under game footage, reviewed, and forgotten. Owen's coffee had gone lukewarm while he'd been lost in his thoughts, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Across the dining hall, Jack continued eating with the focused determination of someone who was very carefully not looking in Owen's direction. "Attention, everyone!" The lodge coordinator, an athletically cheerful woman named Amanda, had appeared at the front of the dining hall with a clipboard and the kind of smile that suggested mandatory fun was about to be imposed on everyone. "Now that the storm's passed, we need to clear the walkways for safety. I've got everyone paired up for snow removal duty." Owen's stomach dropped. He had a terrible feeling about where this was heading. "Carter and Lane, you'll take the main walkway from the dining hall to the guest quarters. Shovels are available at the equipment shed. Let's get this done before lunch." Owen glanced toward Jack's table and saw the exact moment Jack's shoulders tensed at the announcement. For a split second, Jack's head started to turn in Owen's direction before he caught himself returning to his oatmeal with renewed focus. Perfect. Mandatory forced proximity with someone who was actively pretending he didn't exist. Owen drained his lukewarm coffee and prepared himself for what was going to be a very long morning. The equipment shed was a small wooden building behind the lodge, stocked with the kind of basic tools that rustic retreats kept on hand for emergencies and mandatory guest labor. Owen arrived to find Jack already selecting a shovel with the same careful attention he might give to choosing a hockey stick. "Morning," Owen offered, his breath creating a small cloud in the frigid air. Jack grunted something that might have been an acknowledgement and handed Owen a shovel without making eye contact. His movements were sharp and efficient, all business, as if they were strangers assigned to a work detail instead of 2 people who'd been sharing a bed for the past few days. The main walkway stretched from the dining hall to the guest quarters, maybe 50 yards of path currently buried under 8 inches of fresh powder. It should have been a straightforward job for 2 people working together, but Jack immediately positioned himself at the far end of the walkway and began attacking the snow with mechanical precision. Owen watched him for a moment, noting the rigid set of Jack's shoulders and the way he was deliberately maintaining maximum possible distance while still technically completing their assigned task. It was impressive, really, how Jack had managed to turn cooperative snow removal into a study in avoidance. Owen started at his own end of the walkway, trying to establish some kind of rhythm that might allow them to work efficiently toward the middle. The snow was heavy and wet, the kind that stuck to shovel blades and made every scoop feel like lifting concrete. "Maybe we should work in a pattern," Owen suggested after a few minutes of inefficient individual efforts. "Clear the center first, then work outward. It might be easier than—" "Fine," Jack's response was curt, delivered without pausing in his aggressive shoveling technique. He shifted slightly to accommodate Owen's suggestion, but somehow managed to position himself even further away, treating Owen like a co-worker he'd been assigned to tolerate, rather than someone he'd been holding close just hours ago. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the rhythmic scrape of shovels against frozen ground and the occasional grunt of effort. Owen's breath created small clouds that dissipated quickly in the bitter air, and despite his gloves and winter gear, the cold was starting to seep through to his bones. He found himself stealing glances at Jack's profile, searching for any trace of the man who had kissed him so gently the night before. But Jack's expression remained stonily neutral, his jaw set in the kind of hard line that suggested he was actively working to keep any emotion from showing. It was like looking at a stranger, or worse, like looking at the version of Jack that Owen had first met, the one who treated him like an inconvenience to be endured rather than a person worth knowing. Owen tried to focus on the task at hand, but his movements were becoming increasingly jerky and frustrated. Every deliberate non-glance from Jack felt like a small rejection, every monosyllabic response another confirmation that whatever had happened between them was being systematically erased. They'd been working for maybe 20 minutes when Owen couldn't take it anymore. He stopped shoveling abruptly and planted himself directly in Jack's path, his cheeks flushed from cold and emotion. "Are you going to pretend last night never happened, or are you actually going to look at me?" Jack's shovel paused mid-swing, his knuckles white around the handle. For a moment, Owen thought he might actually get a response, some kind of acknowledgement that they were two people who had shared something real instead of strangers completing a work assignment. But Jack didn't meet his eyes. His jaw worked silently, like he was chewing on words he refused to speak, and then he resumed shoveling with renewed aggression. "You know what?" Owen's voice sharpened, the same edge from their fridge fight creeping back in. "I get that you're scared, but a non-expired food you can just throw away when it becomes inconvenient." Jack said nothing, just kept shoveling, each scrape of the blade against frozen ground feeling like another door slamming shut. Owen stood there in the snow, watching Jack's methodical destruction of innocent winter precipitation, feeling foolish for believing that one tender moment could crack through Jack's emotional armor. The cold was seeping through Owen's boots now, and his fingers were starting to go numb despite his gloves, but he couldn't move, couldn't go back to pretending that last night hadn't happened, couldn't accept that Jack was capable of such complete emotional compartmentalization. I thought... Owen started, then stopped. What was the point? Jack had made his position clear through aggressive snow removal and strategic silence. Whatever Owen had thought he'd felt, whatever connection he'd imagined between them, it had been entirely one-sided. The wind picked up, sending loose powder swirling around them, and Owen finally stepped out of Jack's path. He picked up his own shovel with movements that felt mechanical and defeated, matching Jack's rhythm of systematic snow destruction, while trying to ignore the hollow ache that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. They worked in silence for another 10 minutes, clearing snow with the efficiency of two people who had absolutely nothing to say to each other. Owen focused on his breathing, on the burn in his shoulders, on anything except the growing certainty that he'd completely misread everything about Jack Carter. When Amanda appeared to check on their progress, she found two men who had successfully cleared a walkway and looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Excellent work," she announced with the kind of forced enthusiasm that suggested she'd noticed the tension but was choosing to ignore it. "Why don't you two take a break?" Hot chocolate in the main hall. Jack was already walking away before she finished speaking, leaving Owen standing in the cleared walkway with a shovel in his hands and the growing realization that whatever he thought was happening between them had been nothing more than his own wishful thinking. The hot chocolate could wait. Owen had some serious emotional recalibration to do first.
Chapter 8. The Beanie Incident. Jack told himself he was just going back inside to grab his gear bag. That was it. Simple task. In and out, no lingering in the lodge's main room where the scent of pine and dying fireplace embers made everything feel too quiet and too loaded with meaning. But there it was, sitting on the coffee table like a forgotten piece of Owen himself, the clipboard. The same one Owen carried everywhere, with its color-coded tabs and motivational stickers that Jack had initially found ridiculous. Now the sight of those cheerful little stars and "You've got this" smiley faces made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. Jack approached the table like the clipboard might bite him. Owen's handwriting covered the visible page. Neat, careful notes about protein ratios and meal timing that somehow managed to look both professional and personal at the same time. A small stack of backup stickers had been clipped to the corner, as if Owen was prepared for any motivational emergency that might arise. He should leave it, let Owen come back for it himself, or ask someone else to grab it. Jack had already done enough damage for one weekend, and touching Owen's things felt like crossing another line he had no business approaching. But his hands moved anyway, lifting the clipboard and tucking it under his arm before he could overthink the gesture into paralysis. It felt warm against his ribs, like it was still carrying some trace of Owen's constant energy. The drive back to Cold Pines passed in a blur of highway and the growing certainty that Jack was making a mistake. Every mile marker ticked by with increasing evidence that he was overthinking everything, turning a simple weekend retreat into some kind of emotional crisis that required immediate action. By the time he reached the den, Jack had convinced himself that returning the clipboard was just basic courtesy. Owen would need it for meal planning, and leaving it at the lodge would be inconsiderate. This was practical thinking, not whatever his brain kept trying to turn it into. The locker room felt cavernous and echoing without the usual chaos of 20-odd players changing gear and talking trash. Jack's footsteps sounded too loud on the concrete floor as he made his way to his corner, the clipboard still tucked against his side like some kind of security blanket. He set it down on the bench with exaggerated care, then stared at it for 20 minutes. The motivational stickers seemed to mock him with their relentless optimism. A particularly enthusiastic unicorn declared, "Believe in magic," while a cartoon avocado announced, "You're all that and a bag of chips." Owen had probably stuck those on during some late-night meal planning session, completely unaware that they would eventually make Jack question every decision he'd made in the last 48 hours. Jack pulled out his phone, then put it away, pulled it out again, scrolled through his contacts until he found Owen's name, then closed the app without calling. He could text, something simple and professional about the clipboard. No mention of snow clearing or truth dare or the way Owen had tasted like hot chocolate and possibility. Instead, he found himself pulling up the team contact sheet. Standard procedure. All the emergency numbers and addresses in case someone needed to be reached outside normal hours. Jack had never paid attention to where any of his teammates lived. But now, Owen's address seemed to glow on the screen like a neon sign advertising poor life choices. 15 minutes later, Jack was sitting in his truck outside a modest apartment complex with the clipboard on his passenger seat and absolutely no rational explanation for how he'd gotten there. The building looked exactly like the kind of place Owen would choose, tidy but not fancy, with window boxes that someone actually maintained and a front door painted cheerful yellow. Jack knocked 3 times before admitting that Owen wasn't home, which made sense because normal people probably had Sunday evening plans that didn't involve sitting in parking lots having emotional breakdowns over office supplies. He should leave, put the clipboard by the door or slide it under with a note, then go home and pretend this entire weekend had been a fever dream brought on by too much forced proximity and Dana's manipulation. The door handle turned easily under his hand, unlocked, because of course it was unlocked. Owen had texted him the door code weeks ago when Jack had offered to drop off meal plans during Owen's flu, though Jack had never actually used it. Owen probably left his car keys on the dashboard and his wallet on restaurant tables, trusting the world not to take advantage of his fundamental belief that people were basically decent. Jack stepped inside before he could talk himself out of it, tell himself he'd just leave the clipboard on a counter and go, quick in and out, like ripping off a bandage. Owen's apartment hit him like a physical embrace. Throw blankets were draped over every available surface, the couch, the chairs, even the back of what appeared to be a vintage rocking chair near the window. The walls were covered in a gallery arrangement that looked like it had been hung by someone with excellent intentions and a crooked measuring tape. Photos mixed with small paintings and what appeared to be a framed certificate for completing a continuing education course in sports nutrition. Plants crowded the windowsills and side tables, somehow managing to look healthy despite Owen's schedule. Jack recognized a few succulents, some kind of trailing ivy, and what might have been an honest-to-God herb garden growing in small pots on the kitchen counter. The whole place smelled like tea and essential oils and something indefinably warm that made Jack's shoulders relax involuntarily. After years of sterile hotel rooms and his own aggressively minimal apartment, Owen's lived in chaos felt like stepping into another universe. Jack moved deeper into the space, his boots silent on the worn hardwood floors. Everything told a story about Owen's life outside the rink. The stack of nutrition journals mixing with what appeared to be romance novels on the coffee table, a guitar leaning in the corner with sheet music scattered nearby, pictures of Owen with people who looked genuinely happy to know him. The kitchen revealed Owen's personality in organized chaos. The fridge was covered in food safety charts and motivational quotes printed on bright paper. Eat the rainbow shared space with more practical reminders about proper storage temperatures. The spice rack had been arranged by color and mood rather than alphabetical order, creating a gradient that somehow made perfect sense in Owen's world. An entire cabinet was devoted to tea, with handwritten labels detailing caffeine levels, optimal brewing times, and what appeared to be Owen's personal mood recommendations. Chamomile for anxiety spirals sat next to Earl Grey for fake dating disasters in Owen's careful script. Jack found himself smiling at that last label, his chest tight with something that might have been fondness or regret or both. He should leave the clipboard on the counter and go. Mission accomplished, courtesy extended, emotional boundaries maintained, but his feet kept moving, carrying him toward the bedroom like he was being pulled by some invisible thread. The bedroom was smaller than the main room, but just as warm, with more of those impossible plants and a reading nook built into what had probably once been a closet. Books were stacked everywhere, creating small towers of knowledge and escapism that somehow managed to look purposeful rather than cluttered. Jack froze when he spotted it, his beanie, his own faded black beanie, sitting on Owen's nightstand like it belonged there. Not tossed carelessly or forgotten in a rush to pack, placed deliberately within arm's reach of the bed. Like Owen had been keeping it close while sleeping, Jack's throat went tight as he reached for the familiar knit fabric. It was soft from years of wear. Still holding the shape of his head, and touching it felt like coming home and running away at the same time. Owen had been sleeping with something of his, had taken the beanie and kept it, probably since that morning at the lodge when Jack had disappeared, rather than face what was happening between them. The gesture was so quietly intimate it made Jack's hand shake slightly as he held the worn fabric. He should put it back, leave everything exactly as he'd found it, and get out before Owen returned to find him standing in the middle of his bedroom, holding evidence of feelings neither of them seemed capable of discussing like adults. Instead, Jack found himself pocketing the beanie and shrugging out of his practice jersey. It was faded and soft from countless washes, the team logo barely visible on the front. He'd worn it during his rookie year, through every training session and practice skate until it became as much a part of his routine as taping his stick or checking his skate laces. The jersey smelled like liniment and hard-earned victories, like the weight room at 4 a.m. and the satisfaction of a perfectly executed defensive play. It held years of sweat and effort and the kind of muscle memory that only came from doing something you loved until your body knew it better than breathing. Jack folded it carefully and placed it on Owen's pillow where the beanie had been, his fingers lingering on the worn fabric. This wasn't a declaration of anything, he told himself, just an even trade. Owen had taken something of his, so Jack was leaving something in return. Simple mathematics. But his hands were trembling as he stepped back from the bed, and the tight feeling in his chest had nothing to do with simple arithmetic. Walking back through Owen's apartment felt like retracing steps through a dream. Everything looked the same, the crooked pictures, the impossible plants, the tea cabinet with its hopeful labels, but Jack felt fundamentally changed by the experience of seeing Owen's private world. By the time he reached his truck, Jack was touching the beanie in his pocket compulsively, his fingers worrying the familiar fabric like a prayer or a promise. He sat behind the wheel for several minutes, staring up at Owen's windows and wondering what would happen when Owen found the jersey. Would he understand what Jack was trying to say? Would he fold it up and put it somewhere safe, or would he leave it on a chair until he could return it at the next team meeting? Jack started the engine and pulled away from the curb before he could change his mind about leaving. But even as he drove toward his own sterile apartment, he couldn't stop thinking about Owen finding the jersey on his pillow. Couldn't stop wondering what message he'd just left in Owen's most private space. The beanie felt warm in his pocket, like it was carrying some piece of Owen with it. Jack pressed his fingers against the fabric and tried to tell himself this was just returning borrowed property. He was getting very tired of lying to himself.
Chapter 9, The Mic Drop. The media lounge at the Den always felt like a holding pen for awkward conversations, with its mismatched furniture and the ancient Keurig that gurgled ominously in the corner. Owen stood near the refreshment table, adjusting his cardigan for the third time in 5 minutes, and trying to convincingly portray someone who wasn't completely distracted by the way Jack's practice jersey felt against his skin. He'd been sleeping in it for 3 days now, ever since he'd found it carefully folded on his pillow like some sort of emotional care package. The soft fabric still carried traces of Jack's scent, something clean and sharp with hints of liniment and whatever soap he used in the team showers. It was probably ridiculous how much comfort Owen took from that faint reminder of Jack's presence, especially when the man himself had gone back to treating him with polite professional distance. But wearing the jersey to bed felt like holding on to something precious and fragile, like cupping his hands around a flame in a windstorm. A sound tech approached with a small wireless microphone clipped to a belt pack, the kind used for all formal interviews. "Mr. Lane, I need to get you mic'd up before we start." Owen nodded absently, barely noticing as the tech clipped the transmitter to his waistband and threaded the wire under his cardigan. Across the room, he watched another tech doing the same setup with Jack, who was already pulling at his collar like the microphone wire was personally offending him. "Owen, you're fidgeting with your sleeves again." Dana appeared at his elbow with her tablet and that slightly manic smile she wore during PR events. "Remember, we want relaxed and natural. You two are comfortable with each other now. 3 weeks of dating, remember?" 3 weeks of pretending, Owen corrected silently, but he nodded and let his hands fall to his sides. Around them, reporters and camera crews were setting up for what Dana had described as a casual lifestyle piece, the kind of puff journalism that would show the team's new couple in their natural habitat being adorable and photogenic. Jack stood near the far wall, looking about as natural as a caged bear in his good jeans and the button-down Dana had clearly picked out for him. His hair was actually combed, which somehow made him look younger and more approachable, though the permanent furrow between his brows suggested he was counting down the minutes until he could escape. "All right, everyone," Dana clapped her hands together with the enthusiasm of someone caffeinated beyond human limits. "Let's get some shots of our lovebirds by the trophy case. Owen, maybe you could point out something interesting while Jack looks adoringly at you." Owen caught Jack's expression and had to bite back a laugh. The look on Jack's face suggested he'd rather eat his own skate laces than gaze adoringly at anything, much less on command. They moved through the poses with practiced efficiency now, Owen gesturing at team photos while Jack stood close enough that his warmth radiated through Owen's cardigan. Jack pretending to listen intently while Owen explained the nutritional philosophy behind the new smoothie station. It should have felt routine by now, this careful choreography of fake affection. Instead, it felt like slow torture. Every stage touch, every manufactured smile, every moment when Jack's hands settled on his lower back, or their fingers brushed while reaching for the same water bottle, it all felt like echoes of what had happened at the lodge, like pale imitations of the real warmth they'd shared before Jack had retreated behind his walls again. "Great, now let's get some shots in the press box," the photographer called out, already packing up her equipment. "The lighting up there is fantastic this time of day." Owen nodded and stepped away from Jack's side, the sudden absence of warmth making him shiver slightly. "I'm going to grab some water first," he said to no one in particular, needing a moment to collect himself before the next round of performance. The water station was tucked around a corner near the entrance of the press box, hidden from the main lounge by a concrete pillar that provided blessed privacy from cameras and expectant smiles. Owen filled a paper cup and took a long drink, letting the cool water soothe his throat and trying to pretend his chest didn't feel tight with unspoken feelings. That's when he heard the journalist's voice, sharp and probing in the way that made his skin crawl. "Come on, Carter, you really expect people to buy this wholesome romance angle?" The woman's tone carried the kind of aggressive skepticism that turned interviews into interrogations. "I mean, it's obviously a publicity stunt. Your image needed work after the fridge incident, and suddenly you're dating some clipboard-carrying nobody who probably can't even skate." Owen froze with a paper cup halfway to his lips, his heart dropping into his stomach like a stone. He pressed himself against a pillar, hidden but close enough to hear every word with crystal clarity. This was it. This was the moment when Jack would grunt his agreement or make some sarcastic comment about doing what the team required, confirming what Owen had always suspected, that he was just a convenient prop in Jack's rehabilitation tour. Who probably can't even skate, the reporter repeated with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I mean, what does a nutritionist possibly have in common with a professional hockey player? Owen closed his eyes and braced himself for Jack's response, his grip tightening on the flimsy cup until the paper crumpled slightly in his fingers. 3 weeks of fake dating, and he was about to hear exactly what Jack really thought of him when no one was supposed to be listening. Owen Lane works harder than anyone in this building. Jack's voice cut through the air like a blade, clear and fierce with an intensity that made Owen's eyes snap open in shock. This wasn't the deflection or grunt of agreement he'd been expecting. This was something else entirely. He cares about every player on this team, even the ones who don't deserve it, Jack continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. He shows up every day and makes sure we're all eating properly and taking care of ourselves. And half the time, we treat him like he's invisible. You want to know what he has in common with professional hockey players? He's tougher than most of us. Owen's breath caught in his throat as he listened to Jack defending him with a passion that seemed to come from somewhere deep and genuine. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't part of their PR agreement. This was Jack Carter, notorious for his media silence, speaking from the heart about Owen in a way that made Owen's chest feel too small to contain what he was feeling. I wish I was half as steady as him, Jack continued, unaware that his wireless microphone was still transmitting his words throughout the den's sound system. He's the best thing that's happened to this team, and anyone who can't see that is an idiot. The words echoed across the arena, broadcast to every corner of the building where staff and crew members were going about their afternoon routines. Owen felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes as Jack's fierce defense wrapped around him like armor, protecting him from the journalist's casual cruelty with a force he'd never expected. Mr. Carter, The reporter started, clearly scrambling to recover from the unexpected passion in Jack's response. We're done here, Jack said flatly. Owen heard his footsteps retreating, but then a sound text panic voice cut through the ambient noise. Oh shit, sorry, his mic's still hot, has been this whole time. Someone kill audio to the main system. Too late. Jack's passionate defense had been broadcast live to every corner of the den through the building's announcement system. His words about Owen being the best thing that's happened to this team now echoing in the sudden, stunned silence. Owen stood frozen against the pillar for several long moments, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The paper cup trembled in his grip as he tried to process what had just happened, tried to reconcile the fierce protectiveness in Jack's voice with the careful distance he'd been maintaining since the lodge. Jack had called him the best thing that had happened to the team, had said he wished he was half as steady as Owen, had defended him with a conviction that suggested those weren't just pretty words meant for public consumption. Around him, the den had gone unusually quiet, as if everyone who'd heard the broadcast was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Owen set down his cup with shaking hands and made his way toward the locker room, his feet moving without conscious direction. He needed to find Jack, needed to look him in the eye and ask if he'd meant what he'd said, needed to know if the man who just defended him so fiercely was the same one who'd spent the last few days treating him like a professional acquaintance. The locker room was empty except for Jack, who sat heavily on one of the benches with his head in his hands. His shoulders were curved inward in a way that made him look smaller than Owen had ever seen him, as if the weight of his public admission was pressing down on him like a physical force. Jack's button-down was wrinkled now, the careful styling Dana had arranged completely abandoned. His hair stood up in spots where he'd been running his fingers through it, and even from across the room, Owen could see the tension radiating from every line of his body. This was Jack Carter without his armor, vulnerable in a way that made Owen's chest ache with the desire to offer comfort. But he approached slowly, unsure of his welcome, his feet silent on the rubber flooring until he reached the bench where Jack sat. Owen lowered himself onto the bench beside Jack, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, but not quite making contact. The space between them felt charged with unspoken things, heavy with the weight of everything they hadn't said since that kiss at the lodge. I heard what you said, Owen said quietly, his voice soft but steady in the echoing space of the empty locker room. Jack's head snapped up, his eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to panic. His face had gone pale except for the flush high on his cheekbones, and Owen could see the exact moment when Jack realized his wireless mic had been live during his passionate defense. "Owen, Jack started, then stopped, his usual eloquence deserting him when he needed it most. "I never wanted fake Jack," Owen said before Jack could find a way to take back what he'd said. "But I never expected real to hurt this much either." The words hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross, honest and raw in a way that made the air in the locker room feel thin. Owen's hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his knuckles white with the effort of keeping them still, when what he really wanted was to reach out and touch Jack's face, to smooth away the furrow between his brows and tell him it was okay to feel things. Jack stared at him for a long moment, his dark eyes searching Owen's face as if looking for some hidden trick or trap. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need." The admission hit Owen like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so raw, so completely without the defensive walls Jack usually kept between himself and the world. This was Jack's fear laid bare. Not that he might fail, but that he might not be enough. Owen felt his heart crack open at the vulnerability in Jack's voice, at the way he was sitting so carefully still, as if movement might shatter whatever fragile honesty had settled between them. This wasn't the gruff defenseman who grunted through interviews and glared at reporters. This was just Jack, scared and trying to figure out how to be human with another person. Without thinking, Owen reached out tentatively, his fingers finding Jack's knuckles and brushing across them with butterfly lightness. Jack's hands were warm and slightly rough from hockey tape and calluses, real and solid under Owen's touch. "Maybe we could figure it out together," Owen whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet locker room. The words carried all the forgiveness and hope and terrifying possibility that Owen had been holding in his chest for weeks. They carried the weight of sleeping in Jack's jersey and keeping his beanie close. They carried the memory of hot cocoa by the fireplace and a kiss that had tasted like truth and promise. They carried the offer of something real if Jack was brave enough to reach for it.
Chapter 10, Home Game. Jack stood outside Owen's apartment building like an idiot, his phone clutched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The screen showed 4 different drafts of the same message, each one deleted before he could work up the nerve to hit send. "Can you come over?" "Too needy." "We should talk." "Too formal." "I have something to say." "Too vague." "I'm an emotional disaster, but I think you already knew that." "Too honest." A couple walked past him on the sidewalk, the woman glancing back with obvious concern for his mental state. Jack probably looked like he was planning to break into the building or having some kind of breakdown. Both were accurate assessments. He typed the message for the 5th time, hit send before he could chicken out, and immediately wanted to throw his phone into traffic. "Come over, I made tea, badly," followed by his address. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, which meant Owen had been looking at his phone. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for the response. On the way. No questions, no hesitation, just that quiet acceptance. Owen seemed to have an endless supply, even when Jack didn't deserve it. The drive back to his apartment felt like the longest 20 minutes of his life. Jack's place had always been functional rather than lived in, but standing in his own doorway waiting for Owen to arrive, it felt particularly pathetic. The fold-out couch that served as his entire living room furniture sat against one wall, still bearing the creases from being stored upright for months on end. He'd bought it thinking he might have people over, then realized he had no people to invite. The kitchen counter was lined with protein containers in various stages of emptiness, testament to his complete inability to feed himself like an adult human. The refrigerator held eggs, condiments, and a half-empty gallon of milk that might or might not be expired. He'd never checked. In the corner by the single window, his lone plant drooped dramatically toward the floor. Jack wasn't even sure what kind of plant it was. Something green his sister had given him when he'd first moved to the city, with strict instructions to water it twice a week. He'd been watering it twice a week for 3 years now, more out of stubborn refusal to admit defeat than any actual gardening skill, and somehow the thing was still alive, barely. Bedroom wasn't much better. Old hockey posters covered most of the wall space, team photos and action shots from his junior league days that he'd never bothered taking down. His dresser held a collection of championship rings and trophies that meant less now than they had when he'd earned them. The whole space felt like a museum to someone else's life. Jack had just finished making the world's most questionable pot of tea when the buzzer rang. His hands shook slightly as he pressed the button to let Owen up, then spent the next 3 minutes in a panic about whether he should stand by the door or sit casually on the couch or pretend to be doing something normal like reading a book he didn't own. He settled for leaning against the kitchen counter, trying to look like he hadn't been spiraling for the past hour. The knock was soft, tentative. Jack opened the door to find Owen standing in the hallway with his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He'd changed out of his event clothes into jeans and a soft-looking sweater that made his eyes look impossibly warm. "Hi," Owen said simply. "Hi." Jack stepped back to let him in, hyper-aware of how small his apartment must seem compared to Owen's cozy chaos. "Tea's ready. Fair warning, it's probably terrible." Owen's lips quirked up at the corners as he stepped inside and shrugged out of his coat. His eyes took in the space without judgment, landing on the protein containers and dyeing plan with the same neutral expression he might have used to evaluate a perfectly normal living situation. "Smells good," Owen lied graciously, accepting the mug Jack offered with steady hands. They migrated to the couch by unspoken agreement, settling on opposite ends with careful space between them. Jack cradled his mug like it might anchor him to something solid, staring down at the dark liquid and wondering how to start a conversation he'd never learned how to have. Owen seemed content to wait, sipping his tea without complaint, despite the fact that Jack had definitely oversteeped it and possibly used the wrong temperature water. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy with unspoken things. Jack had spent most of his adult life avoiding moments like this, sitting still long enough for feelings to catch up with him, being alone with another person without the buffer of a game or a team or cameras to perform for. This was just him and Owen in his pathetic apartment, drinking bad tea and existing in the same space without any agenda beyond being honest with each other. It was terrifying. "I meant what I said," Jack finally managed, his voice rougher than usual. He kept his eyes fixed on his tea, unable to meet Owen's gaze while the words fought their way out of his throat. "About wishing I was half as steady as you." From the corner of his eye, he saw Owen shift slightly on the couch, turning to face him more fully. When Owen spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "You don't have to be someone else, Jack. I just need you to be honest about who you are." The simple acceptance in Owen's tone hit Jack like a punch to the chest. Not a demand to change or be better or perform some version of himself that might be more palatable. Just honesty, just the truth of who he was, rough edges and all. Something cracked open in Jack's chest, some tightly held fear he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. The idea that he might be enough exactly as he was, that Owen might want him without requiring a complete personality overhaul, was so foreign he didn't know how to process it. Jack set his mug down on the coffee table with hands that weren't quite steady and turned to face Owen fully. The careful distance between them on the couch suddenly felt like miles. "I'm scared of being seen," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Really seen, but I'm more scared of you walking away, because I was too much of a coward to try." The confession hung between them like something fragile and vital, all of Jack's fear and hope wrapped up in sentences he'd never meant to say out loud. Owen's eyes went soft at the edges, that particular expression he got when Jack said something real instead of hiding behind sarcasm or silence. Owen reached across the space between them, his fingers finding Jack's and threading together with a certainty that made Jack's breath catch. Owen's fingers were warm and sure, real and solid in a way that made everything else feel possible. "I'm not walking anywhere," Owen said, his voice steady and sure, "but I need this to be real, not just when cameras are watching." Jack brought their joined hands to his lips without thinking, pressing a soft kiss to Owen's knuckles as the words whispered out of him. No cameras, no performance, just us. The truth of it settled in his bones like coming home, like finding something he'd been looking for his entire life without knowing it had a name. This was what real felt like. Owen's fingers warm against his, the quiet acceptance in his eyes, the way they fit together on Jack's minimal couch like they belonged there. When Owen shifted closer, Jack didn't pull away this time. Instead, he slid his free hand around Owen's waist, drawing him in until they were sharing the same air, the careful distance finally abandoned in favor of closeness that felt like choice rather than performance. Owen's free hand came up to cup Jack's face, thumb brushing across his cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You sure about this?" "Never been sure about anything," Jack admitted, leaning into the touch. "But I'm tired of being scared." When Owen kissed him, it was different from the lodge. Deeper, more certain, carrying the weight of decision rather than impulse. Jack let himself fall into Owen's warmth without reservation, without already planning his exit strategy or bracing for disappointment. Owen tasted like the terrible tea and something sweeter, something that might have been hope. His lips were soft and sure against Jack's, patient in a way that made Jack's chest ache with gratitude. This wasn't desperate or rushed. This was Owen choosing him, here in his pathetic apartment with his dying plant and protein containers, choosing him exactly as he was. Jack's hands found the hem of Owen's sweater, fingers sliding underneath to touch warm skin, and Owen made a soft sound against his mouth that went straight through Jack like electricity. They moved together without urgency, mapping the shape of each other with careful hands and shared breath. When Owen's fingers started working at the buttons of Jack's shirt, Jack didn't stop him. When Owen whispered his name against his throat, Jack didn't pull away. When Owen took his hand and led him toward the bedroom, Jack followed without question. They moved together in the space between Jack's hockey posters and championship trophies, stripping away layers both literal and metaphorical until there was nothing left but skin and honesty and the soft sounds Owen made when Jack touched him just right. Jack had always thought of his bedroom as a monument to his past, but with Owen spread beneath him, eyes dark and lips swollen from kissing, it felt like the beginning of something entirely new. They made love slowly, carefully, like they had all the time in the world to learn each other. Jack traced every freckle on Owen's shoulders, memorized the way he gasped when Jack kissed the sensitive spot below his ear, discovered that Owen got chatty when he was close, whispering Jack's name and soft encouragements, until Jack thought he might die from the sweetness of it. After, they lay tangled together in sheets that had never held another person, Owen's head pillowed on Jack's chest while their breathing slowly returned to normal. Owen's fingers drew lazy patterns across Jack's ribs, and Jack let himself enjoy the weight of another person in his space, the warmth of skin against skin, the incredible novelty of not wanting to be anywhere else. "Your plant's not actually dying," Owen murmured against his collarbone. "It just needs more light." Jack huffed a laugh, his arm tightening around Owen's shoulders. "Everything in this place needs more light. We could work on that," Owen said, and something in his tone made Jack's heart skip. Not a demand or a takeover plan, just a quiet offer. Like they were a unit now. Like Owen might want to stick around long enough to help Jack figure out how to make his apartment feel like home. Jack pressed a kiss to the top of Owen's head, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and the lingering sweetness they'd created together. "I'd like that." He woke hours later to sunlight streaming through windows that had never seemed so bright. Owen curled against his chest like he'd always belonged there. Owen's hair was sleep mussed and golden in the morning light, his face peaceful in a way that made Jack's chest tight with feeling. For the first time in his adult life, Jack's apartment felt like more than just a place to sleep between games. It felt like somewhere he might want to build something real, something lasting. It felt like home. Owen stirred against him, making a soft sound that might have been contentment, and Jack allowed himself to imagine mornings like this stretching out ahead of them. No cameras, no performance, no performing, no carefully maintained distance. Just this. Owen warm and sleepy in his arms, sunlight painting everything golden, and the quiet certainty that yesterday had changed everything. Jack had spent his entire career learning how to defend, how to protect what mattered. Looking down at Owen in his arms, he realized he'd finally found something worth protecting that had nothing to do with hockey and everything to do with home. Epilogue, still penalty worthy. Owen settled into their usual back corner booth at Brew and Blue Lines, watching Jack order at the counter without his signature scowl. The barista, a college kid named Tyler who'd previously looked like he might faint whenever Jack approached, was actually smiling, nodding with genuine enthusiasm as Jack pointed at something on the menu board. The transformation was so complete that Owen had to blink twice to make sure he wasn't seeing things. 3 weeks of real dating had apparently worked miracles on Jack's public demeanor, or maybe it was just that Jack no longer felt like he was performing every interaction. Either way, Tyler wasn't clutching the espresso machine like a life preserver, which Owen counted as progress. Jack returned with 2 lattes, Owen's topped with foam art shaped like a tiny heart, his own black as motor oil, and slid into the booth across from him with an ease that still surprised Owen after weeks of genuine dating. The rigid tension that had once defined Jack's shoulders had softened into something more relaxed, more approachable. Even his usual game day beanie sat at a less aggressive angle. "Tyler's getting bold with the foam art," Owen observed, tilting his cup to admire the delicate heart design. "Last week it was just a crooked leaf." "Kid's been practicing." Jack wrapped his hands around his mug, steam curling between his fingers, said he watched tutorials specifically for our visits. The casual way Jack said "our visits" sent a warm flutter through Owen's chest. No hesitation, no careful word choice to maintain distance, just the simple acknowledgement that they were a unit now, worthy of foam art tutorials and reserved corner booths. They discussed Jack's upcoming game against Toronto with the comfortable rhythm of 2 people who'd learned each other's conversational patterns. Owen pulled out his tablet to review Jack's new meal prep schedule, noting the increased protein requirements for the back-to-back games this weekend. "The quinoa salad for Thursday's lunch has the highest absorption rate if you eat it within 3 hours of practice," Owen explained, swiping to the nutrition breakdown chart. "But if you're running late, the backup option with the hemp seeds will give you similar." Behold the evolution of love. Owen jumped, nearly dropping his tablet as Luca appeared beside their table like a theatrical genie, practically vibrating with excitement. The rookie goalie had somehow materialized without either of them noticing, which was impressive considering Luca's usual approach was about as subtle as a foghorn. Luca produced a wrapped package from behind his back with the flourish of a magician revealing his grand finale. "I present to you the latest masterpiece from the Brew and Blue Line's merchandising department." Jack's expression shifted into familiar territory, the long-suffering look he reserved for Luca's more dramatic moments. "Please tell me you didn't commission another." "Oh, but I did." Luca unwrapped the package with the reverence typically reserved for archaeological discoveries, revealing a new couple mug that made Owen's breath catch. Oh, this wasn't the original mug with its awkward stock photo and forced smiles. This featured a candid photo from last week's game. Jack's arm around Owen's shoulders, both of them laughing at something off camera. Owen could barely remember what had been so funny, but the image captured something that made his chest tight with recognition. They looked genuinely happy. They looked real. The updated slogan reads "Still Pendley Worthy" in bold letters beneath their photo, and Owen couldn't help but laugh at how perfectly it captured their journey from fake crisis management to real affection. "Luca, this is..." Owen started, but his voice caught on the emotion lodged in his throat. The photo showed them as they actually were now, not performing or pretending, just existing together in a moment of unguarded joy. Jack rolled his eyes and muttered something that sounded like dramatic little shit under his breath, but Owen caught the way Jack's thumb traced over their printed faces with unexpected tenderness. The gesture was unconscious, automatic, and so softly reverent that Owen felt his heart skip. "The marketing team pulled it from the game footage," Luca explained, bouncing slightly on his toes. "Tyler said it was flying off the shelves before they even finished the first batch. Apparently, authentic happiness is a hot commodity." "Authentic happiness," Jack repeated dryly. "That what we're calling this now? Better than performance-enhanced relationship?" Owen shot back, grinning when Jack's mouth twitched toward a smile. Jack made a show of pretending to toss the mug toward the trash can near the counter, earning a horrified gasp from Luca that probably violated several noise ordinances. But instead of following through, Jack smoothly slid the mug into his gym bag with the careful movements of someone protecting something precious. "For research purposes," Jack said gruffly when he caught Owen watching. "Got to know what the fans are buying." "Right," Owen agreed solemnly. "Research." Luca beamed like he'd just orchestrated a successful peace treaty. This is so cinematic. The character development, the symbolic merchandise evolution. I should document this for... Luca, Jack interrupted, with the patient tone of someone who'd learned exactly how to redirect Luca's enthusiasm before it reached critical mass. Don't you have a thing? Oh, Ray, Coach wants me to review goalie positioning footage before practice. Luca practically skipped backward from their table. Enjoy your research materials. As Luca disappeared through the crowd, Owen shook his head with fond exasperation. He's going to turn our relationship into a documentary series. Already started, Jack said grimly. Found him taking notes during team dinner last night. Called it observational character study. It'd be worse, Olin pointed out. He could be writing fan fiction. Jack's expression shifted into pure horror. Please tell me he's not already doing that. Owen's silence was apparently answer enough, because Jack dropped his head into his hands with a groan that conveyed existential suffering. It's probably not that bad, Owen offered weakly. Is my character emotionally constipated? Yes. Do I brood excessively? There might be some brooding. Does he use the phrase throbbing masculinity? Owen winced. I stopped reading after chapter 2. Jack made a sound like a wounded animal. I'm burning his laptop. You can't burn Luca's laptop. He stores game footage on there. Watch me. Owen reached across the table to pat Jack's forearm in sympathy. Think of it as job security. If people are writing stories about us, we must be doing something right. Jack lifted his head just enough to give Owen a look that suggested he questioned every life choice that had led to this moment. But his hand turned palm up under Owen's touch, fingers interlacing with easy familiarity. Come on, Owen said, squeezing Jack's hand. Let's get you to practice before you spiral into an existential crisis about your fictional representation. They gathered their things with the synchronized efficiency of people who'd fallen into routine without planning it. Owen tucked his tablet into his bag while Jack shouldered his gear, movements coordinated like they'd been doing this dance for years rather than weeks. As they prepared to leave, Jack helped Owen into his coat with automatic care, hands smoothing the fabric across Owen's shoulders and checking that the collar lay flat. It was such a small gesture, but the thoughtfulness behind it made Owen's heart flutter every time. The intimate moment was interrupted by an enthusiastic whisper from a nearby table. Oh my God, they're actually cute together. Owen's cheeks warmed with pleased embarrassment as he caught sight of a young fan at a corner table, giving them an enthusiastic thumbs up. She was maybe 16, wearing a Kodiak's jersey and clutching her phone like she was debating whether to ask for a photo. Owen tensed slightly, old habits expecting Jack to freeze or create distance at the first sign of public attention. For all their progress, the reflexive fear of unwanted scrutiny still lives somewhere under Owen's skin, waiting to make him hyper-aware of every watching eye. But Jack simply reached for Owen's hand and threaded their fingers together with confident ease, thumb brushing over Owen's knuckles in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Ready? Jack asked, and the question carried layers Owen was still learning to navigate. Ready to face the world as themselves, not as a carefully constructed PR strategy, ready to walk through cold pines holding hands without apology or explanation, ready to be seen exactly as they were, impeded and perfect and real. Owen squeezed Jack's fingers in answer, marveling at the steady warmth of Jack's palm against his. Ready? They walked out into the cold pines, afternoon hand in hand, Jack's grip steady and sure. The winter air bit at Owen's cheeks, but Jack's presence beside him felt like carrying sunshine. Behind them, Brew and Blue Lines hummed with the comfortable noise of afternoon regulars and clinking coffee cups, but Owen barely heard it. He was too busy marveling at how something that had started as performance, awkward posing, and reluctant cooperation had become the most real thing in his life, penalty-worthy and perfect, just like the mug now carefully tucked in Jack's gym bag. Walking down Main Street with Jack's hand in his paw, he realized he'd stopped thinking about their relationship in terms of what it had been and started thinking about what it was becoming. No cameras needed, no carefully staged moments for public consumption, just Jack choosing to reach for his hand. choosing to be seen with him, choosing to build something that belonged entirely to them. The young Finn's words echoed in his mind. They're actually cute together, and Owen couldn't help but smile. Yeah, they actually were.
Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment.